5 years old. Being raised by a single, working mom. She doesn't bother with the kindergarten shit. Instead, an old lady who lives in the same apartment building makes my breakfast and watches over me until her grandkids are back from school. They come back before my mom does, which means that for about 2 to 3 hours, I am home alone. One day, during that window of time, I get a phone call. Some man I don't know asks if my parents are home and I tell him I'm alone. Back in the day we got a lot of calls from people who dialed the wrong number, so this wasn't unusual to me. Man doesn't hang up though, and he starts chatting with me. I'm bored as fuck, so I'm glad for the company. Pretty much tell him everything, that I don't have a dad, that there's a lady who watches over me in the morning, but leaves at noon, that I'm alone until 15h so I get bored and lonely a lot, etc. He tells me that he is a college student and that he moved away from his parents, so he gets lonely too, says he'll call me again at the same time tomorrow so we can keep each other company. He does call, and this turns into a ritual. Normally we just chat about whatever inane bullshit comes across a 5-year-old's mind, but sometimes he'd make up stories for me. Only vaguely remember one of them, which was about a very good boy who ended up in a world where all the rules are the opposite, so he was suddenly considered bad. This goes on for a long time, 4 months maybe. I think I told my mother I had a new friend, but she dismissed it. Anyway, time for my 6th birthday come and I'm super excited and tell him all about the party I'm going to have and the gifts I'm about to get. He says that since we're friends, he should send me a gift too and asks for my address, saying he'll mail me something. Being a greedy little shit, I tell him. He doesn't call again, my birthday comes and goes, and I get no gift in the mail. I remember being very hurt by this, thinking he forgot about me. About a month or so after he stopped calling, I get a ring at my door as soon as the woman who watched over me left. My mother taught me to not let anyone into the apartment when I'm alone and to just ignore the doorbell, so I did. After a while, the ringing stopped and I heard a familiar voice calling out to my name. Anon, please, I know you're in there. I've got you your gift. I tell him that I'm not allowed to let him in and ask him why he didn't send it by post like he said he would. He explained that the gift was too big to be sent by post, so he needed to come over and give it to me in person. He is pleading I let him in, says he is my friend. I'm feeling very uncomfortable at this point, though at the time I wasn't quite sure why. Still, being curious about the gift, as well as about how my friend looks like, I looked through the peephole. He didn't look like how I imagined him at all. I can't say he was ugly, but he looked off. Tall, skinny, acne, very baby-faced, which didn't seem to match his deep voice at all. He looked almost sickly. Elle immediately noticed that he was empty-handed and that there was no gift around. I still vividly remember the cold, sick, empty feeling in my gut when I realized that something is extremely wrong, and that I have made a terrible mistake. Elle immediately start to bawl and to plead that he goes away. I don't know what I thought he was going to do, but I knew that it isn't good. He tried to comfort me, while still pleading to be let inside. He then started fake crying, saying that I must hate him. I almost said that I didn't, when he started trying to get the door to open. The door was locked, but I was still completely petrified. I tried to block it with a chair like I saw in cartoons, but I couldn't do it. My brain went to autopilot and I screamed, "I'm calling the police." That made him stop, and he immediately left. I was extremely shaken, but also ashamed. I knew I fucked up, so I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Instead, I insisted that I want to go with the lady who was watching over me and stay at her place until my mom gets home. Soon enough I started going to school, and for a while I would stay there to do my homework instead of going home immediately after class, because I didn't want to be alone there. I don't know for sure if he ever called again, but we did get a couple of silent calls here and there. I don't know that it was him, but I feel that it was. Even though the old man told me to stop for nothing on that road while it's dark, it was natural for me to turn around and go back to help after passing two bodies lying in the middle of the road. I knew I should have listened when the two bodies stood up and another 20 hillbillies poured out from the pitch-black banks on the side of the road to surround me. A guy I know had something similar happen. He was in Haiti with his sister and her hubby. Driving along the road they see a car with suitcases and clothes and stuff all over the floor. Two people lying face down. His sister wants to look, the guys think fuck that and carry on driving. Look back, they see people coming out of the tall grass. The two on the ground get up. This freaked me the fuck out when I heard this for the first time. Think it was on an old forum or some shit. I was driving through the mountains once to visit a family member. It was a 2-lane highway that went around a bunch of turns. I did a 45-degree turn, very fucking sharp turn, pretty dangerous, and had to immediately slam on my brakes. It looked like a pileup had happened in the middle of the road, maybe 5 to 6 cars. There were two things that scared me, though. One, that the cars seemed perfectly fine and were still idling, and two, that there were just bodies on the ground with no marks at all. I ended up weaving through the cars and bodies, not easy since it's a 2-lane road, and as soon as I was out, I looked at my rear view mirror. All the bodies had stood up but were still perfectly still, and there were now people coming out from the hillside, running. Needless to say, I drove out of there as fast as I could, and I definitely didn't drive that road on the way back. I'd cool. So, my dad's lived in a few unique places, such as Shreveport, Louisiana, where his family's chimney was struck by lightning, and South Dakota, which is where his first post-college job was. Dad works for engineering company in the middle of buttfuck nowhere, South Dakota. Shitpay. Right around the time he starts seeing my mom, knew each other in HS, never thought about it, got together after HS. Mom is getting dental hygiene degree back in the Cove. Dad's driving from South Dakota. Takes route through the northeast tip of Wyoming. Country road, tall grass on both sides. Dad has Mustang at the time because fuck you, he loves cars. Sees stopped car by the edge of the road. Couple trying to wave him down, he starts slowing down a good 50 meters behind them. Suddenly sees people in the tall grass starting to come out. He freaks the fuck out and guns it down the road. Looks in rear view mirror and sees about 15 people come out of the grass. I've heard other people tell similar stories like this. Is this a common carjacking technique or cult thing? B1 AM, driving home from work at local cinema. Only about 2 streets from my house. See something in the middle of the road, right under a street light. Brake as I get closer, as I realize it's a man. See that there's another dude also lying face down on the footpath on the right side of the road. Put car into park, open door. As I open door I see the man's arm flinch. Get strange feeling. Close door. Decide to drive around the man in the street, and stop a bit up the road and call for help. Watch as both men casually stand up and I see what looks like hammers in their hands. Nope the fuck out of there, drive 2 streets home with my lights off in case they see me, and be scared of helping people on the road ever since. To clarify, I joined the USMC when I was out of high school. This happened several years ago while I was on leave. Driving from California to New Mexico. Taking shortcut through Amboy. At the time a satanic hotspot. Be about 5 p.m. Take a pic of the city sign to prove I actually took I-40 to friends. Get back on the road, get to top of mountain. See some stuff in the middle of the road. Slow down, see a red Pontiac stopped sideways across both lanes. Open suitcase with scattered clothes. Man and woman face down in the road. Stop about 100 feet away. Hair on neck standing up. Immediately pull out my 9mm pistol from under my seat and chamber around. Way too perfect of an accident scene, like when civilians play dead in Iraq to lure soldiers into a suicide bomb radius. Admit I'm being paranoid, but can't bring myself to leave my vehicle. Scan the road, see a line I could drive. Pass the guy's left, swerve to the woman's right, go behind the Pontiac and I'm clear. Drop into first, gun it. Pass the Pontiac without hitting any bodies. Roll forward a bit before slowing down so I can stop panicking. Look in my rear view mirror. The two bodies are on their knees. 20 or so people emerge from the tall grass on either side of the road. Slam my foot onto the gas and speed down I-40 until I got onto the next on-ramp. Eat up a ton of gas and coolant, nearly destroyed my Mustang's engine. Stop taking shortcuts to get anywhere. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped my car closer to them, and by God, I'm glad I never will. Boyfriend at the time lives 2 hours away in a remote town smaller than the one I live in. He comes to get me on weekends to spend time with him at his place. Road between our towns is super remote, barely any houses along it and has no gas stations in the 2-hour stretch. Boyfriend at the time and he had to pull over to pee. This stretch has no street lights, no gas station, so you're pretty much fucked if you break down. He drove the car to truck pull over part, not sure what they're called, and got out and stood next to my open window facing away from the road so we could keep talking while he did his thing. He got back in the car and I thought I had heard someone call out. Now I watch a lot of spooky movies and something in my brain told me not to just get out of the car and start looking around for this noise. Now the spot we had parked had no houses nearby, we hadn't passed any cars in at least an hour, so it freaked me out a bit. I told my boyfriend what I heard and he fluffed it off saying I was hearing things. He goes to start the car and I hear it louder. It sounds like a woman who's chain smoked her whole life screaming out, "Help me." Boyfriend hears it too, starts the car with the intention of reversing so he could shine the headlights on the area the noise is coming from. I'm half out the window squinting into the darkness trying to spot the person. As the car starts, 5 people stand up from the tall grass and a man yells out, "She asked for help, cunt," and a group of people laughing. They were maybe 10 meters away and started towards the car and I am freaking the fuck out. Boyfriend slams car into gear and speeds off while I'm winding up my window as fast as I can. People run onto the road and after the car. 2 out of the 5 people were holding sticks, I think, could have been bats. Nope the fuck out, call police and they said they'd send someone to check the area. Never fucking stop to piss along that stretch again. This happened this most recent August. Second weirdest thing I've ever seen in the state, easily the most unsettling. Get 3 days free after doing 24/7 grandpa care for 2 months. Get 2 friends to go in the mountains with me. Leave Friday night in a truck pulling a trailer with 2 four-wheelers. Light finally fades about 10 p.m., mid-August in Alaska. Take it easy on speed because big ol' diesel. Get to the target highway at about midnight. Pavement ends at mile 21-ish. Everything to now has been pretty normal. Couple miles in, road turns left with a small pull off on the right side. Little Subaru parked there facing into road. LED light bar at face level. PNG. There's someone leaning on the hood watching us as we drive by. Tired by this point, not real concerned. Figure it's someone waiting for their hunting buddy, it's caribou season. Keep going. Going 30 miles per hour if I'm lucky. Truck, trailer, and teeth all going daka from washboards. Nice bright full moon, can miss the worst spots. Hit real long straight stretch before trailhead pull off. Get half mile down straight stretch, about halfway. Lights in rear view mirror. Fucking bright AF light bar again. This nigga hauling ass 50 to 60 miles per hour or more. One friend is zonked in the back, the other one is spaced out. Point the light bar car out to him. He watches them in the side mirror, doesn't seem too unsettled. Car is maybe 200 feet back when I finally pull into the trailhead. Car catches up 10 seconds later. Slows down to 5 mph going by, obviously checking us out. Hackles raised. Tif. Park the truck, watch them drive down the highway for a bit. Let out a deep breath. Look to the left at the other corner of this parking area. There's an SUV parked there, NBD. This is where it gets way out of whack. Wake up the other friend, kill the engine, hop out. Instant gut assessment, shit's fucked, we're being hunted, time to go. My response to this novel sensation, hey, there's something written on that SUV. Shine my flashlight on it. Moloch written in the dust on back window since it was parked. Oh fuck what? Friends are stretching legs, one has his AR out, they're both too quiet. Check out SUV. Engine still warm, parked within a few hours. Only front passenger door is locked. Shoes/sandals and shorts, comfy driving wear, on front seats. Full packs and compound bow in back. Full cooler. Tent. Everything is untouched. 6MO expired youth group sticker on hood, empty coffee hut coffees. Looks like a young couple out to camp. Friends are checking out this SUV. We're all at independently reached 10/10 maximum alert. Look around the whole area, nobody is there. No fresh tracks except in parking area itself. Another pair of cars with LED light bars go by hauling maximum S. We keep rifles on M from cover as they go by. Give in to gut feeling, leave. Camp 30 miles away on a different highway. Come back in the morning. SUV still there, untouched. Still no sign of anybody around. Terrible gut feeling gone. Take the four-wheelers and go 8 miles back in the mountains. Have a good time camping, get bullied by a caribou. Come back in next day. Nobody was out there, great lines of sight and nowhere to hide. SUV untouched. Food in the back is starting to go off. Get back to town. Call SUV into troopers. Dispatcher goes, yeah, that's sketchy AF, I'll send someone out. Call back 2 weeks later to see what came of it. No record of having ever called it in, but they have every other call I've made. Sorry/K/. Some stories don't have a good ending. I'm convinced we were getting checked out and the only reason they let us be was because we had our ARs propped up on the seats and very visible. I never have found any explanation for what I saw out there. All I know is that gut feeling I got when I got out of the truck was the spookiest thing I've ever felt, and all three of us felt it independently. There's some fucked up shit going on out there, I'm convinced. A friend of my dad's would babysit me sometimes when I was little. Mom wasn't in the picture, and he used to tell a story to me that scares the absolute shit out of me to this day. Dad's friend, I'll call him Bob, is driving a rig out in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, Oregon. Has to make the delivery by the following morning, so he decides to just drive through the night. It's like 1 in the morning, no one else is out on the roads. Hasn't seen another car in probably 100 miles. He is literally in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly the whole entire sky lights up. Instantly like daylight. Bob fucking slams on the brakes, has no idea what the hell is going on. Everything stays lit up for a good solid 10 seconds, he can see everything. Whatever's happening, it's not lightning, it doesn't stop or flicker at all. Bob hunkers down, anticipating imminent nuclear devastation. Suddenly sky goes dark again. No sound, no blast wave. He sits there in the middle of the road waiting for almost 5 minutes. Then decides to keep going. Figures it was a meteor or something. Goes about 2 miles up the road and sees a car with its flashers on stopped in the middle of the road. Stops a good distance away from it. There's not enough room to go around it. Front end of the car is crumpled like it hit something. Bob figures they probably hit a deer that got spooked whenever the meteor went over and ran into the road. He gets out of the cab and goes to see if the driver is okay. Driver is sitting on the ground by the driver's side door. Has his knees up and is resting his head on his arms. Hey buddy, you okay? Bob calls. He stops about 10 feet away for seemingly no reason. Something about the whole situation feels weird. Bob is one of those guys that always listens to his gut, so he stays put. God, my head is killing me, the guy says, but he doesn't lift his head up so it's muffled. Did you hit a deer? Bob asks. He's getting more and more uneasy. Something's wrong. But he still can't figure out what exactly it is. The guy says he think he might have hurt his head, asks Bob to please help him. Bob takes a step forward, but his instincts are going apeshit. He looks at everything again. That's when he notices it. The fucking car is all wrong. It looks like what someone thinks a car looks like. It has all the right pieces, but there's nothing extra, if that makes sense. Bob says it looked like a cheap Hot Wheels knockoff, it just looked wonky and wrong. He looks around at the back of the car and realizes that not only is there no license plate, there's not even a trunk. It's just one solid piece of material with tail lights put in it. There's no manufacturer or model names. Bob knows cars, and this thing is nothing he's ever seen before. From where he's standing, he can see there's no tailpipe or even hubcaps. It's just the shape of a car. He starts to back up and the guy asks him for help again. Bob tells him he can't help him and that he'll call a tow truck when he gets to the next town. The guy lifts his head and looks at Bob. Tells him he thinks he might have a concussion. Something is really wrong with the guy's face, but again it takes a second for Bob to figure it out. The next part is exactly how Bob described it. Everything on the man's face was where it should have been, in their normal positions. He looked totally normal. Except for the fact that his eyes and mouth were on upside down. Bob goes apeshit and sprints back to his rig. Climbs in. Locks the door just in time for the man to slam into the door behind him. How the fuck did he get there so fast? He knocks on the glass and smiles at Bob, but because his mouth is upside down it looks like he's screaming. Tells Bob to open the door so he can come in. Bob fucking floors it. Doesn't care if he hits the guy or not. His truck easily pushes the car out of the way. Whatever it is, it's light and it makes no sound when he hits it. Unfortunately, it's an anticlimactic ending. Bob got where he was going fine, with no other problems. My dad knows the story, but I don't think he believes it. But Bob tells it to everyone he meets, so he obviously does. He's absolutely adamant about the guy being an alien. Years later I heard about the Thatcher effect and nearly had a fucking heart attack when I saw it. I showed one of the pictures to Bob and he wouldn't even look at it. He says it's exactly what the guy looked like. Pic very much related. When I received the letter from him in 2002 I was surprised. I didn't think he died or anything, but figured he got bored, was too busy or forgot about me. The first thing I noticed was his handwriting has deteriorated quite noticeably. His hands seemed shaky and he made frequent spelling mistakes, something he did rarely in the past. I've translated this letter and this is what it said. Anon, it's been a very long time since I've written to you, so much has changed it feels like a lifetime. I have been juggled from institution to institution for the past 5 years, each one trying to make me feel like I've gone mad, that the things I've seen were not real. I know they are real, I played along so they let me out, but I know they're keeping them on Jeannette Island. It's absolutely disgusting what they do to them, it's hard to even imagine. We're not alone, we haven't been alone for years. I know this means shit to you, but I know the censors check my letters. I can't write to you what I want to tell you. Send me your telephone address, or better call me. He then put down a phone number which I've tried to call several times, it wasn't picked up several times. I tried calling it every week for several weeks. It was picked up once. All I heard was static, but whoever was on the line didn't hang up for a good 3 minutes of me trying to get across to them. I've moved on with my life, but it's been at the back of my mind for a long time. I had a look at Google Maps, and if you try to zoom in on the island on the satellite picture, it's been blacked out. What the fuck goes on there? Parents die in a car wreck. A week or so later, I'm laying in bed, crying myself to sleep as usual. Hear a creak on the floor outside my room, and giggling. My dog perks up and starts growling like crazy. My mom slowly leans around the corner of the door. She looks different, and her movements are all wrong. Jerky and twitchy. Go to sleep, Anon, it'll all be better soon. It's her voice, but sounds clotted somehow. My blood is ice water. My dog is whimpering and cowering now. Mom jerks back around the door. Another creak. My dad leans around the corner. It's okay, son, we're gonna be a family again soon. Just fall asleep, and giggles. Like my mom, his movements are all spastic and fucked up, his face is a grinning rictus. He jerks his head back out of sight. My heart is pounding. Quickly and quietly as I can, I grab my phone and dial 911 to report a home invasion at my address. I can hear movement and that insane giggling from the hallway. I'm laying there with tears rolling down my face from fear. I don't know how long it was until I saw flashing lights outside the house and muffled shouts. Hurried movement in the hallway, something crashes to the ground. Muffled shouts from downstairs as the cops come through the front door. Thank you, God. They search my house, and afterward a cop approaches me white as a sheet. Anon, it's hard to tell you this, but we found your parents' faces on the ground outside. That was almost 10 years ago. They never found the sick fucks that did it, and I still have nightmares. Be me. Late 1990s. Work in a very rural area of Russia, as a sort of ranger/wildlife preservationist. In Russia we don't have the same regulations and strict protocol as some of you might. We more or less just drive around on ATVs and berate poachers, while we ensure the safety of the deer population and shit like that. I worked in a rural area, surrounded by forest and harsh wilderness. Only had one colleague, who we'll call Pyotr, it's short and easy to remember. Pyotr was your typical backwash crazy Russian dude, who brewed his own vodka and smoked like a chimney. He was my best friend for several years, and always had my back no matter what we faced out there in the woods. The job had shit pay, but it came with loads of perks that made it worth it. We had no boss, and could basically just go camping, get wasted and call it an excursion. I will admit that we once or twice hustled some innocent hunters from their money by claiming that they were poaching. We were corrupt as fuck, but still managed to make some decent arrests and put some real poachers behind bars. But sometimes we got calls that required us to do some actual hard work. If people spotted sick animals, it fell upon us to go out there and make sure it didn't spread. If an animal showed aggressive behavior that might endanger the locals, we had to ensure that the animal got put down. We had friends at the local vet who would run blood samples if we suspected rabies or something else. One day Pyotr and I got a call from some pretty spooked locals. They told us that some boys had gone hunting a couple days ago, but none of them had returned. They all believed that they had been killed by bears or wolves. Great, now we have to venture into the wilderness for some potentially aggressive carnivores. They point us in a general direction, and we take off on our ATVs. We drive around the area for about 3 hours, when we find an abandoned campsite. It was evident that the camp had been trashed by something, probably a bear. By the looks of it, the boys had left camp in a hurry, not even bringing their rifles. From then on we went on foot, with our guns drawn, just in case. We found the first corpse a few meters away from their camp. He was lying on his stomach, with several deep wounds to his back. What struck us as weird, was that it was deep puncture wounds, which we had never before seen in a bear or wolf attack. There was a clear path, which indicated where the other boys had fled. We found 2 boys in the same small area, both of them lying dead with similar wounds. One of them had practically been gutted. Piotr was visibly shaken by the scene, and just kept shaking his head in disbelief. According to the locals, there was supposed to be 4 boys out here, so we were still missing one. We both tactically shat our pants, when we heard something rustling through the brush towards us. We aimed at the commotion and waited for it to reveal itself before we shot. I almost dropped my rifle when it emerged from the dense bushes. It was a red stag, with the mangled remains of the 4th boy stuck in its antlers. It had trouble holding its balance under the weight of the boy, but still bellowed aggressively, as if it was about to charge us. Piotr was the first to snap out of the shock, and started lighting the fucking thing up. Upon further inspection we noticed that its antlers were worn down and broken. It had put an excessive amount of force behind each of its charges, breaking its antlers on the poor boys. The reason the 4th boy was stuck in the antlers, was because the damn thing had practically torn through his rib cage. We couldn't separate the boy from the antlers, so we had to bring the head with us. It was one of the most fucked up rides home, with the cargo of several corpses tied to the back of our ATVs. The local authorities were pretty angry at us, seeing as we had moved bodies from a potential crime scene, but let us off easy, seeing as the killer was literally embedded into one of the victims. Seeing the heartbroken parents of these boys still haunts me. That night I hung out with Piotr, mostly because I was still pretty spooked. "That shit wasn't natural," he said at one point. "Deer can be aggressive and defend against predators, yes. But this fucker hunted down those boys and killed them all. They don't do that shit." That was the first time I caught a glimpse of the spooky shit that goes on out there. In the following years I saw some deeply insane shit, that only Piotr and I know about. I will share the stories with you, and hopefully you will believe me and understand why I am scared shitless every time I see a deer. About once or twice a month, we had to go on excursions into the wilderness to look for signs of poachers, sick animals, and other stuff like that. One time we decided to drive out to a fairly secluded area, because there were rumors of some potential poaching. It was a very long drive, so we had always put it off, praying that the poachers would just get mauled by bears, so that we didn't have to make the long journey. We had to drive for about 15 hours, before the terrain became too difficult for the ATVs to handle. We had to walk the rest of the way, which meant we had to camp out. I was pretty uneasy when night came. Camping out is a norm for us, but we were further away from civilization than we had been before, and the previous incident still haunted my mind. Piotr offered me a bottle to ease my worries, but I didn't want to be intoxicated in case we were attacked by some demonic deer. The night went by without an incident. But I still didn't get a lot of sleep. We continued on our trek toward the supposed poacher hotspot. We arrived, looked around but found nothing. There didn't seem to be any sign of human activity anywhere in the area. "Fucking rumors," Piotr mumbled to himself as he shook his head in frustration. Normally we should be happy to find nothing, but this time we were just exhausted and cranky. We were then startled by a loud bellowing echoing through the forest. What the fuck was that? Piotr pulled out his rifle and aimed in the direction of the noise. Though it went against our instincts, we had to go investigate it. We reached a small ridge that overlooked a clearing. In the middle of the clearing a group of 5 stags were huddled together. Their heads were bowed down, as if they were grazing. We noticed they all seemed to make sudden, violent jerking motions, like they were trying to gore the ground with their antlers. Piotr fired a shot into the air, trying to make them scatter. They didn't fucking move. If you have any basic knowledge on wildlife, you know that sudden loud noises makes just about any animal take off running. We fired a couple more shots into the air, but they still didn't react. In a small moment of madness, we decided to calmly approach them, to get a better look at what the fuck they were doing. As we approached them, we were met with the nasty stench of rot and shit. "Is that a fucking bear?" Piotr gestured to the ground in front of the stags. To our collective bewilderment, there was a large, adult brown bear. It was in a stage of decomposition, which meant it had been dead for at least 4 or 5 days. The stags were panting and groaning as they continuously gored the carcass over and over again. They looked seriously malnourished and exhausted. The bear's body was completely ripped apart, except for the head, which they for some reason had left completely unscathed. We stood frozen to the ground, as we watched this horrible scene unfold. How did they take down a bear? How the actual fuck is that possible? I asked Pieter. He shook his head in disbelief, as he raised his rifle and shot one of the stags. He later explained that he wanted a blood sample. As soon as the stag fell to the ground, the others stopped what they were doing, and just turned to look at us. They were covered in rotting blood and chunks of meat. They didn't charge or show any aggressive behavior. They just stared at us, unflinching and unblinking. Pieter had changed his mind about the blood sample at this point, and just slowly started backing away. I followed suit, and raised my rifle, just in case. When we reached the ridge, they resumed their mauling, once again not paying any attention to us. We were fucking done at this point. We didn't set up camp that night, and just kept hiking at a brisk pace until we reached our ATVs. None of us spoke a word the entire ride home, except for the occasional fuck. That incident really fucked something up in Pieter. It took him a couple of weeks before he went with me into the forest again. He was completely convinced that the stags were being manipulated by a witch or something, which I'm not really sure of. I don't really believe in witches and all that. I just believe that nature is a lot more fucked than we believe. We have been away from real, raw nature for so long because we chose to live in cities, that we have likely forgotten how scary and unpredictable it can be. Still, there was something off about those stags. Still don't have an explanation. One day we got a call from the local authorities. Apparently some old man that lived by himself in a remote cabin had not been seen in a while. They wanted us to take them to the cabin, since they weren't used to terrain other than paved streets. We drove them out to the cabin, and parked a few meters from the front door. It was already pretty clear that something had happened. The door was completely knocked off its hinges. Cabin was empty. The officers asked us to assist them in their search, and we agreed. The initial theory was that he had been taken away by a bear, which seemed pretty plausible considering the fucked door. We spread out and followed whatever trails we could find. It took about half an hour, before one of the officers called something in. He sounded a little shaken, but gave us detailed directions to where he was. He didn't tell us what he had found, but instead said, "You'll want to see this yourselves." When we reached him, it wasn't clear what he had found. Since nothing looked out of place. No broken branches, no trail, no nothing. He just pointed up into a large tree in front of him. Slung over one of the higher branches, was a fresh deer carcass. This was certainly odd, but we still didn't get what this had to do with the case. Then we noticed something even stranger. Further up the tree, there was a bear carcass. Something had killed a bear, and then placed it in the tree. I knew that leopards and other big cats did this for later consumption. But there are no leopards or tigers where this took place. The officers looked uneasy, and took nervous glances over their shoulders. We stayed as a group after that, and looked around for another couple of hours before we called it. On our way back, we once again passed the tree. The deer was gone, only leaving some bloody branches behind. We picked up the pace and made our way out of there without looking back. There was a winter where we had a pretty horrible incident. As you would probably expect, the winters can be pretty rough, with a shit ton of snow and -40 degrees Celsius. If someone goes missing, they are immediately presumed dead, because it's impossible to maintain your core temperature for long durations, without being properly equipped. And when someone's child goes missing, it's just the worst. The police once again requested our assistance, because a mother had reported her 6-year-old daughter missing. The thought of spending hours in the biting cold was not welcoming, but we couldn't possibly turn a blind eye to a missing child. The mother had let her children play outside, when one of them had simply started running towards the tree line. They had been out there for some time, calling out her name, but they just couldn't find her. That's when they called the police, who then called us. By the time we arrived at the search area, she had been missing for about 2 hours. We followed a trail that we suspected were hers. It went on for way longer than what a child that age should be able to run. Then it just stopped. There was no sidestepping, scuffling, or any sign of, well, anything. It was like she had just vanished on the spot. We examined the tracks, to see if she had backtracked or something, but there was no clear sign of any double prints. Pieter was visibly upset, and frustrated. We asked the other kids why she had started running into the forest. They had no clear answer, but claimed that she just started running without any warning. The kids were shaking and crying, so we asked the mother to return to their home while we kept looking. An officer followed them back to their house, so that they felt safer. About 15 minutes later, one of the other officers got a call on their walkie-talkie. We could hear the distinct sound of the mother wailing in the background. They had found the girl. They had found her just sitting on the step to their back door. She was dead, and almost frozen solid. She had only worn a regular jacket and pants, considering that she was just supposed to play outside for a little while. The mother had locked the doors before they left, because she didn't want their house to get robbed while they were away. To this day I tear up when I think about it. But I still have some unanswered questions as to what had happened. The obvious solution is that she had returned home, and frozen to death when she couldn't get in. But I still think there's more to it. If she had run back, how did none of her siblings or her mother notice her? Why didn't she respond to their calls? How did she run back without leaving any tracks? How was she almost frozen solid, even though she had only been missing for about 4 hours? None of the neighbors had seen anything unusual, so there was nothing to investigate. The mother blamed herself, and became an alcoholic. I still think about that incident every day. For some reason it hit harder than the 4 boys who had been mauled. Here are a few shorter incidents that can't be made into very detailed stories. I once saw a deer mother bite one of her fawns by the head, and start shaking it violently until its neck snapped. She then dropped it to the ground, and nudged it a couple of times, as if it didn't quite understand what she had done. Didn't stay to observe, because I was a bit freaked out. Found a dead deer lying next to a tree. Markings on the tree, coupled up with markings on the deer's head, suggested that it had rammed its head into the tree's trunk until it died. Took a blood sample. Completely healthy. Stumbled upon a fresh kill in the winter. A deer with half of its face/neck missing. A large hole in its abdomen, with guts hanging out. As I poked the wound, in order to check the temperature, the fucking thing lets out a yelp, and rises to its feet. In complete disbelief, as this bloody mess turns its head to look at me, and starts walking away calmly. Collapses after about 10 meters, and doesn't get back up. This will be the last from me for now. I am pretty tired, and it's exhausting to relive all these horrible memories. I may post more tomorrow, but for now I will leave you with this. I had been seeing a girl for a couple of weeks. For some reason she found my job hot, and thought I was some sort of macho dude. Went along with it, because she was hot. She also hooked Pieter up with one of her friends. She lived in one of the fancier houses in town, with a nice view of the forest from their living room. We decided to have a double date at her house, where we would watch a movie and eat dinner. Of course it didn't take long before Pieter went to the guest room with his girl. I decided not to waste time either, and started sexy time as well. At this point I admit I had neglected my duties a bit. Pieter and I hadn't even been to the forest that month, and hadn't responded to any calls regarding sick animals or poachers. We had gotten caught up in our own personal lives. It honestly felt nice to get a break from the work, seeing as we weren't exactly ever off duty. We fell asleep on the couch, in the living room. At some point during the night I woke up. It was a beautiful, starry night. Walked up to the glass door, leading to the terrace, in order to get a better view of the sky. After a few minutes, I spot something in the distance. The faint glow of eyes hine, from something staring intensely at me. I froze in place, and observed this unknown creature, as it slowly started walking towards me. When it got within the light emanating from the house, it revealed itself to be a medium-sized red stag. It just kept walking towards me, never blinking or taking its eyes off me. It walked directly into the glass, which seemed to puzzle it. It started nudging the glass, which turned into violent pushing. At this point I started backing away, still in complete disbelief at what was transpiring in front of me. Girlfriend wakes up, due to the loud banging on the glass. "WTF is going on, Anon?" she asks, still half asleep. Before I can answer her, the stag starts letting out these guttural screams, as it intensifies its ramming. It breaks through the glass. Girlfriend screams, and Pieter comes running down the stairs, to see what's going on. The stag just calmly walks up to me, like it hasn't just broken through a glass door. Keeps letting out those horrible noises as it just approaches me. I tried backing up, but stepped in some glass and fell over on my ass. The stag just observed me with unflinching eyes, as it kept bellowing. Girlfriend was still screaming. I'm suddenly deafened by the sound of Pieter unloading his small sidearm. Hit the stag multiple times, but mainly missed, leading to a lot of property damage. The stag falls to the floor with a wet thud. To this day I am still grateful to Pieter for bringing his gun. Girlfriend broke up the next day. She said that I was either cursed or unlucky, either way she didn't want anything to do with me. I still always sleep with my blinds on. I never want to see another window into the night, especially when I know what might be on the other side of that glass. I may have ignored the forest, but it certainly didn't ignore me. I have returned. I will share a couple more stories with you. I once found myself lost with Pieter in a snowstorm. We were basically as fucked as we could ever be, with no shelter or any way to start a fire. Snow was falling so densely that we couldn't see more than a few meters in front of us. Wind was so cold that my lips started bleeding. We drove around for what felt like an eternity, until we came upon an old, decrepit hunting cabin. We had difficulty dismounting our ATVs, because our clothes were frozen solid. I still remember how Pieter was shaking, and clacking his teeth. The cabin was completely empty, but had a simple fireplace and some semi-dry wood. As we sat there, slowly warming up by the fire, we had a moment of absolute dread, when we realized that we might actually fucking die. We had no idea how long the storm would last, and there wasn't a whole lot of wood for us to burn. Pieter then rose to his feet and muttered, "Fuck it. Wait here, Anon." He went outside, and returned a few minutes later with an axe. For a brief second I legitimately wondered if he was gonna put me out of my misery. To my relief he started beating the ever-loving shit out of the floorboards. "Use this as firewood. It should keep the fire going for a while longer. Bless you, Pieter, and your demented brain." In the end we probably burned about half of the cabin's floor, which revealed more and more of the cold dirt underneath. And of fucking course there happened to be the remains of a couple of people down there. We were waiting out the storm, stuck in a fucking murder cabin. The remains looked very old, fortunately, just dusty skeletal remains. Seriously debated whether we should leave or stay. Decided to stay, because we'd have a better chance of survival against a psycho Russian killer than the storm. At one point I swear we heard someone approaching the cabin, only to run away into the wilderness. Makes no sense, because only a mentally deranged mongoloid would have the balls to wander around out there. Then again, we were in a cabin with corpses under the floorboards. We sat with our rifles ready, just in case. After a long while, the storm started winding down. We emerged from the cabin, dug our ATVs out of the snow and made our way back to town. Navigating was a lot easier, now that we could see where we were going. Immediately went to the police station. They were surprised to see us, since they had already reported us missing/dead. We told them about the cabin, and agreed to show them the way the next day. I slept for about 14 hours, after soaking in a tub of hot water, best sleep I've ever had. We met up with the officers, and led them through the forest to the cabin. It was fucking gone. There was no trace to be found of it whatsoever. The trails left behind from our ATVs were still very clear. And even the spot where we dug them out. But the cabin was just not there. There was a clear area, where it had been, but there was nothing but a fresh layer of snow. The officers looked irritated, and said that we were wasting their time. They said that we must have been hallucinating, or that we drank too much of Pieter's home brew. It still makes no sense to me. Never found an explanation. Pieter and I had been on one of our excursions in early autumn, when we came across a panicked hunter. He begged us to help his friend, who had been attacked by a bear further up the trail. He drove with us up to where the incident had occurred, but it was already too late. His friend was fucked up beyond belief, face ripped off, gutted and limbs bending in unnatural positions. Almost threw up at the sight. We decided that this bear was too dangerous to be left alive, since it was roaming fairly close to town. We started looking for tracks, to get an idea of where it was headed. The hunter was just sitting up against a tree, too shocked to react to what was going on. He kept describing the creature as a bear, when we asked him. The thing is, we only found deer tracks at the scene. Against our better judgment, we started tracking the fucker. I swear there was a constant stream of cold sweat running down my back. While we hunted this nasty motherfucker. Would honestly rather have been tracking a bear at this point. We reached a clearing at some point, where we found a piece of the guy's face hanging from a thorny bush. We were shitting enough bricks to build a new Berlin Wall at this point, but we trekked on. We finally caught sight of the fucker. It wandered aimlessly around in circles, almost like its internal compass was fucking up. This time, I was the one who shot it. Couldn't let Pieter have all the fun. Hit it in the head. Instant death. Chunks of flesh were still hanging from its antlers. We had to collect the individual pieces, and put them in a plastic bag, so that we could deliver it to the morgue with the rest of the body. We gagged, as we did it, it was so fucking horrible. Ended driving the shocked hunter back with us, so that he could deliver his testimony. Why did you tell us it was a bear? Pieter asked him. You would never have believed me, he answered. If only you knew. Pieter and I were hanging out in his apartment one night, sharing stories and drinking. Sat out on his small balcony, and smoked when we got a call from the police station. There had been strange sightings of a large animal, presumably a bear, roaming the area. Some locals were pretty spooked, and had reported it to the police. Of course it fell under our jurisdiction. We decided that we would check it out in the morning. We didn't feel like chasing some large unidentified creature, while we were half drunk and the sun had gone down. Sit for a few more minutes, just chatting when a deafening screech echoed out from beyond the tree line. We were silent for a couple of minutes. Fuck me, that was loud, Pieter said. No shit, jackass. We decide to check it out. Operation Half-Drunk Russians Packing Heat commenced. We wandered around aimlessly, randomly pointing our flashlights and rifles around in the dark. You've got to be fucking kidding me, Pieter shouted out. He had found large cloven footprints. Don't tell me this is another fucking deer, I swear to God. He sounded both angry and scared shitless. Rustling behind us. We both instantly turn, and aim at the sound. Two glowing eyes reflect our flashlights. It lets out a loud fucking squeal, and charges at us. We both light it the fuck up, while we shit our pants. It's a boar. A fucking boar. But it was so fucking big, that we initially thought it was a bear. Pick related is eerily similar to the bastard we shot. At least it wasn't a fucking deer, I said. Pieter let out a nervous laugh, and shook his head in awe of the fucking beast lying before us. Honestly didn't know what to do with it. We hadn't brought our ATVs, and the thing was way too heavy to carry. Decided to just leave it for the wolves to scavenge. Police actually believed us this time. Some of the hogs out there can grow to enormous sizes, you're lucky it didn't get you. Another thing to worry about, fucking great. Most people don't know this, but there are loads of unmapped/unexplored cave systems all around Russia. This is also the case for where I lived. It wasn't uncommon for Pieter and I to stumble upon a cave or two, while we were on our excursions. Lots of local legends surround the caves, like an underground city of subterranean people, covens of witches, prehistoric animals, and so on. Whatever the case, I've always found cave systems fascinating. It's like entering a new world, where the same rules don't apply. So when the police mounted a rescue team, to help a teenager who had gotten trapped in one of our caves, I didn't hesitate to volunteer. At this point, Pieter and I were respected and well liked with the police, they trusted us, and included us in some of their work. Pieter didn't come along this time, because he was too hungover. As the case stood, 2 teenage boys had tried to explore a local cave system that had some very steep drop-offs. One of the boys had lost his footing and tumbled down into the darkness. He was still alive, but had broken his ankle, and couldn't get out. Rather than getting stuck himself, his friend had chosen to send for help. We made our way through the cave, making sure to watch our steps. The cave floor was damp, and covered with algae, so it wasn't a surprise that the boy had slipped. When we came to the drop-off, we shone our lights down at him. He waved, and smiled, knowing he was saved. I started descending the steep rock wall, with the rope tied at my waist. When I reached the bottom, I secured the boy to the rope, and gave the officers the signal to start pulling him up. He went that way, the boy said to me, and pointed to a narrow passageway at the back of the cave. "Excuse me?" I asked, wondering if he had hit his head on his way down. "My friend." He came back for me, and told me he had found an exit that way. I was confused, but told him, "Your friend is up there, with the others." His face went completely pale on the spot. "But he was down here with me. He went that way." An uneasy feeling hit me, which I tried to ignore. Now I was stuck at the bottom of this small chasm, until they threw down the rope again. And this kid claims that someone was down here with him, even though his friend had gone straight to the police. I felt very exposed, and kept focusing on the narrow passage at the back of the cave. I point my flashlight to the ground, and find fucking footprints leading into the passage. Fucking bare feet. Fuck. Just as I am unloading a metric fuckton of bricks, they throw the end of the rope down, and hit me right on my shoulder. I let out a shriek of terror, that those bastards never let me lie down. As they pulled me up, I refused to look back down. Got the fuck out of there as fast as possible. Fuck whatever was down there. One of our biggest problems with poachers, was that they would sometimes leave behind these heavy-duty, rusty bear traps. Pick related for reference. Sometimes they never came back for them, which meant that some parts of the forest could potentially be a minefield of broken ankles. Sometimes we would find rotting carcasses, that had become trapped in one and left to die. I once almost stepped in one, but Pieter noticed the chain in time to stop me. "Thanks again, buddy." One time we came across one of these traps, which had been sprung. Left in the trap was a boot, with the foot still attached. The rest of the body was gone. Large pool of blood left behind, along with bloody pieces of fabric. From what we could see, it looked like someone had gotten stuck, and then had his foot amputated. We followed the blood trail, but found no body. He must have been with a friend, who drove him out of there. The ironic part is, that bear traps are fairly easy to break out of, if you know which pin to pull. Poor guy lost his foot, because of some dumb-ass poacher. Took the foot with us, and asked around in the police station. They hadn't had any reports of people getting fucked by bear traps. This guy didn't even go to a hospital. This meant he had either been a poacher himself, or just one tough son of a bitch. Never found him, or heard about him since then. Still, finding a severed foot is never nice, especially when you know the type of shit that's out there. Pieter once showed me an abandoned settlement he had found back in the day. Though we were roughly the same age, I was more of a city boy than him. He had always lived out in the less populated areas, and spent a lot of his childhood and teenage years on exploring the forest. He rarely talked about his childhood, mainly because of his alcoholic father who beat him and his mother. But he trusted me, and sometimes opened up, after a bottle or two. To him, exploring the wilderness was a way to escape from his dysfunctional home, which is why he had a pretty good internal map of the place. We drove for a couple of hours, until we arrived at the settlement. It looked rotten, and old as hell. Most of the buildings were made of wood, that was ready to collapse at any second. Some were made of your typical Soviet concrete, and looked about as stable as our economy. Still, we chose to explore for a bit, just in case. After all, this place would have made an amazing base for poachers. The houses were empty, except for some damp furniture and a couple of stoves. The concrete structures, on the other hand, still had some interesting stuff lying around. We found some wet boxes of old dynamite, which led us to believe that it was an old mining town. Sure enough, there was a large quarry a few kilometers away, which we found later. A lot of the stuff we found were too rusted to make out what it had once been, everything else was just in a state of decay, that made it seem pretty unsafe for us to fool around with it too much. It's not uncommon to find old abandoned mining towns, that were never put on a map, so we didn't really take a second to wonder why it had been abandoned. That is, until we spotted the fucking deer. Pieter anxiously nudged my shoulder, and gestured to the right of us. There was a large stag watching us from behind one of the houses. The more we looked around, the more deer we noticed. There were maybe 10 or 12 of them, just observing us. They didn't seem threatened by us, but rather like they were making sure we were on our way out of there. We slowly approached our ATVs as these fuckers just followed us silently, never blinking or making a sound. When we got to our ATVs, we debated whether or not we should light them up, but we decided against it, because we didn't want a herd of bloodthirsty demon deer charging us. We just started driving away, counting ourselves as lucky, seeing as they hadn't decided to fuck us up. I remember looking back, once we were 100 meters or so away, and seeing well over 20 deer standing there, motionless. "Fuck that!" Pieter shouted, as we raced out of the area, and back to town. We never went back, but often talked about it. He firmly believed that the deer had something to do with the settlement being abandoned. I'm not so sure, but I definitely don't think it's out of the question. Fuck deer and their mysterious fucking ways. At this point, the police knew of our various encounters. They didn't really believe us, but still respected us enough to not mock us. After all, we had retrieved quite a few bodies for them, that had been fucked to high hell by deer. That all changed when one of the officers, one of my friends, had gone missing. He had responded to a call, about some kids that had claimed to have been stalked by a strange old man while they played in the forest. For some reason, he had gone out there alone to investigate. That was 16 hours ago, and nobody had heard from him since. Pieter and I helped with the search, since we both knew him quite well. Hours of searching yielded nothing. Then, someone found his handgun lying on the ground. It had been fired twice, but we couldn't find the bullet casings. One of the officers had brought a search dog. It took a few whiffs of the gun, and started darting off into the woods, obviously tracing something. We followed as best as we could. But the damn thing was fast as fuck. Suddenly the woods were filled with the sound of aggressive barking, and whining. We arrived at the spot where the dog had gone, and found, big surprise, a fucking deer. From one of its antlers hanged the lifeless body of the officer. It had impaled him through his throat and out the mouth. It was so fucking grotesque, that I still get a lump in my throat when I think about it. He was my friend, and that fucking deer had killed him. It stood completely still, its head weighed down by the officer. The dog whimpered and snarled at it, but didn't move an inch closer to it. One of the police officers shot at it, which caused us all to just light it the fuck up. Retrieving his body still stands clear in my mind as one of the hardest things I'd ever done. After that incident, the officers always took our claims seriously. They even offered backup, when we went on our excursions. I still wonder about that old man, though. Did the kids just imagine him? Pieter still insisted that something supernatural was manipulating the deer, making them aggressive and batshit insane. I still leaned more towards the theory that deer are just, by their very nature, batshit insane. At one point we were checking out a potential poaching camp. When we arrived, we were greeted by two older men, who immediately started questioning us. We explained the situation to them, and asked them to step aside, so we could inspect their camp. It was a pretty standard camp, with some fresh kills and pelts. But the men seemed very nervous anyway, like they were hiding something. We started questioning them, until they cracked. They admitted that they had shot and killed about 7 or 8 deer the previous night. But they hadn't retrieved a single of their carcasses, and had simply fled the area. What kind of hunter kills animals, just to let them rot, huh? Why the fuck did you do it? Pieter asked them, with a sense of urgency in his voice. They explained that they had been sitting in a deer blind, waiting to take a decent shot at some unlucky deer. They then spotted one, that walked straight at them. When they aimed at it, they saw its eyes through their scopes. It was looking directly at them, but still just walked calmly towards them. That's when they heard a twig snap, and realized their blind was being surrounded. All of them had the same lifeless look in their eyes. None of them made a noise, or any sudden movements. When they had completely surrounded the blind, they started pulling some aggressive expressions, and began bellowing at the hunters. Their blind was raised about 3 meters off the ground, and supported by 4 wooden pillars. The deer started ramming the supports, while they kept bellowing. The hunters were scared shitless, and just started shooting the deer one by one. They ran back to their camp after that, and hadn't been out hunting since. They showed us the way to their blind, and sure enough, there were several deer carcasses lying at the base of it. There were visible markings on the supports, that backed up their claim. They then asked us if they were gonna get in trouble for what they had done. We told them no, as long as they didn't do anything with the carcasses, we wouldn't press charges. Normally we would have made them pay a fee, but seeing as they had been through an encounter with the psycho deer, we sympathized with them. In fact, we thanked them for taking care of them for us, since they were a threat to the locals. We told them that if they ever encountered aggressive deer, they should put them down immediately. They looked a bit puzzled, as we drove away. Never saw them again. Pieter and I were once out on one of our excursions, when we ended up getting hunted by a pack of wolves. Normally, wolves tend to stay away from humans and avoid us at all costs. But this time they were literally chasing us, on our ATVs. I didn't really get a good look at their numbers, but I estimate that there were about 8 or 10 of them. They chased us for about a kilometer or so, when I accidentally ran directly into a tree, and got hurled through the air. I blacked out from the impact, but when I awoke, Pieter was sitting beside me, having a smoke. It took me a moment or two, before I remembered what had happened. but when I looked around, there were no wolves to be seen. Where did they go? Did you scare them off? I asked Pieter. He shook his head. I tried to scare them off, but they weren't even interested in you or me. He pointed towards my ATV. It was damn near ripped apart. They attacked it, and kept clawing, biting and ripping until they started bleeding out of their mouths. Several teeth were embedded in various places of the ATV. It didn't turn on. They had completely fucked the engine. Pieter's ATV was completely unharmed. What the fuck, man? Had to leave the ATV behind and bum a ride off Pieter. At this point, I was pretty sure nature just hated me. It became a sort of joke between Pieter and me, that I had chosen the one job that required me to stay in nature for long durations at a time, only for nature to completely reject me. This is going to be the last of my posts. It's gonna be a long one, but it will describe the incident that eventually led me to move to Europe. I thank all of you in advance for reading my ramblings. And I especially thank those of you who believe me. It all started when Pieter got a terrible idea. He suggested that we found a central point in the forest, perhaps near a lake, or anywhere deer were known to frequent. Then we would set up a blind, in one of the biggest trees there, and camp out for a week or so, shooting any deer that seemed off. At first I called him a dumbass, seeing as our job was to preserve the wildlife rather than mow it down. To be honest, I was also terrified at the thought of spending an entire week in the middle of nowhere. He called me a pussy, and gave me an ultimatum: either you go with me, or I go out alone. I wasn't about to let my best friend go out there all by himself for a week. He probably knew that, and used it as bait. We drove to the local hardware store, and picked up the necessary equipment for our little project: screws, wooden planks, rope, etc., etc. Then we went shopping for other supplies, such as canned food and water. We loaded our ATVs with all our gear, and set off into the wilderness. I wondered why Pieter suddenly wanted us to do something so rash and stupid, but figured he had just had enough. I didn't blame him. The weird thing was, though, we had actually not experienced anything unnatural for almost half a year up until that point. Part me wondered if he actually wanted to seek it out, for some reason. He never told me why he decided to lead this retarded crusade against the deer, but I still went with him so that I could watch his back. We eventually found a pretty large lake, surrounded by big, beautiful trees. It was early August, so we weren't in any danger of freezing to death while we slept. We started building our blind, which ended up being more of a wooden platform, 5 or 6 meters above the ground with a great view of the lake. By the time we were finished, the sun was setting. We had seen no sign of wildlife while we built our blind, but fing'd it was due to the amount of noise we made. Our plan had one huge flaw, that we had failed to realize. Fucking mosquitoes. We had no cover, and were placed right next to the goddamn mosquito capital of fucking Russia. We caught no sight of anything strange the first night, except for each other's swollen faces. At dawn the next day, we awoke to the sound of something splashing around in the water. We peeked over the edge of our blind, and saw a doe, along with 2 fawns. We observed them for about 15 minutes, before we determined that they were pretty normal. Similar incidents happened every once in a while the first couple of days, nothing out of the ordinary. I felt relieved, and wondered if they had migrated to some new place, planning on terrorizing some new rangers. But for some reason, Pieter seemed extremely tense, and would curse under his breath. "Hey, Pieter, WTF is going on, man?" He looked at me with a hollow expression, and sat up beside me. He explained that he had been having nightmares about the deer. He felt that if he killed some of them, he could prove to himself that he had nothing to fear. The poor guy hadn't had a decent night's sleep in well over a month at that point. He almost started crying, while he told me these things, which really showed me how close this guy was to the edge. I had to help him, so I stayed with him and kept a lookout while he took a nap. I hadn't told him anything, but I had actually been looking into how much it would cost to move away from Russia. I hadn't said anything, because I wasn't really planning anything. Besides, I didn't feel like I could just leave him behind. I kept an eye on our surroundings for several hours, and almost decided to just lay back and enjoy the view of the lake, when I heard something approaching to our left. Out of the tree line stepped a lone stag. I waited a bit, to see if it would behave strangely before I woke Pieter up. It bowed its head, and motioned as if it had started drinking from the lake, even though it wasn't anywhere near the lake's shore. That was more than enough proof for me, and I slowly shook Pieter until he woke up. He instantly crawled over to the edge, and looked at the deer, grinning with some sort of sadistic satisfaction. He aimed at it with his rifle, and fired. A direct hit, straight to chest. He let out a sigh of relief and started laughing. We heard the sound of several animals walking around within the tree line, but never saw one of them. It almost seemed like that lone stag had been bait. To see how we would react. This only fueled Pieter's paranoia. He was practically trembling with fear every time we heard something wander around in the tree line. Sometimes a deer would appear on the far side of the lake, but no matter how many times Pieter and I shot at it, we never hit it. At night, our main source of light was a lantern, that ran on petroleum. Part of me always suspected that it was a horrible idea, to use that in a blind made of dry wood. The fifth night into our crusade, shit hit the fan. We kept spotting the eyes of several animals, but every time we looked through our scopes there was nothing. It felt like they were toying with us. Pieter started firing shots into the air, trying to deter the creepy fuckers from whatever they were doing. But of course it didn't work. I picked up the lantern, and raised it higher, in order to illuminate the ground better. When I stand up, I get lightheaded, and fall over. I drop the lantern, which in turn starts a goddamn inferno. We abandon everything, and just descent down our rope. My rifle was up there, along with most of my favorite gear. As we stood there, in the night, the blazing blind illuminated a lot more than the lantern had. I still shudder at the thought. The largest flock of deer I had ever seen, were standing in the tree line. All of their eyes were lit up from the flames, giving them a hellish appearance. Pieter is practically hyperventilating at this point, and makes a dash towards our ATVs. We hit the ignition, and get the fuck out of there. We never looked back, to see if they followed or anything the entire ride back. We just kept driving, and letting out cries of adrenaline mixed with actual terror. When we got back, Pieter just went home without saying a word. I went to my apartment and completely shut myself off from the rest of the world. Locked my door, closed the blinds and turned off my shitty phone. I stayed that way for a couple of days. Then I got the sudden urge to get a drink. I had already consumed every bottle of alcohol in my apartment. So I went to a bar that was located on my street. When I entered, I was met with worried looks, from the people who knew me. "How are you doing?" the bartender asked me with a sympathetic tone. This surprised me, because none of them should have known about the shit Pieter and I went through that past week. Could have been better. "Why?" I asked. "Well, after Pieter's accident you just kind of disappeared for a little while." Pieter's accident? What the fuck had happened while I was in my apartment? My expression made the situation pretty clear. "Oh shit man, I thought you knew." Then he filled me in. Pieter had packed his bags, and rented some run-down car, with the intention of skipping town. He had taken off in a heavily intoxicated state, and had hit a tree at 120 kilometers per hour. The car was totaled, and Pieter had died on the spot. After a few minutes of silence, I remember standing up, and just walking out of there. I walked around aimlessly for hours, trying to make sense of what had happened. Eventually I found myself back at my apartment complex. I noticed a piece of paper hanging out of my mailbox. I began tearing up when I read it. My dear friend, I have decided to leave this place. I can no longer bear the shadow that looms over us, and I hope you will come visit me someday. You helped me through some shitty times, but this time you can't help me. If you decide to come over, you can find me at XXXXXX, not exactly written like this, but you get the general idea. I cried for so long, that it seemed like an eternity. Still tear up, as I'm typing this. After about a month or so, I decided to move out of Russia and get a fresh start. I know I can never escape my past, or the nightmares that keep resurfacing, but I can put great distance between then and now. I still miss that crazy bastard every day, and will never forget what an amazing friend he was. I now live safely in the heart of a big city, far away from any forest. I sometimes go on drives through some of the more scenic woods, but it still feels so fake. European forests don't have the same raw feeling as the Russian forests. I sometimes miss my old home. I just wish there wasn't an abundance of terrifying animals roaming the woods. I haven't experienced anything unnatural since I moved. And I have finally learned to sleep properly at night. I regularly speak to a psychiatrist about some of my experiences, and feel more in control of my fears now. Well, that's my story. Believe it, if you will, either way it is very real to me. And next time you get the chance, please raise a glass to Pieter. Honor his memory, and the man he was. Uncle lived with me and my folks growing up. I was about 10 when I found him dead in his room. Suicide. Box cutter. Slashed his wrists. The walls, the floor, even the ceiling and ceiling fan had blood on them. I remember standing in the doorway. I remember screaming. Dad rushed over to see what was the matter. The thing that sticks out in my memory most is the ceiling fan on high, spinning and creaking repetitively overhead. Then it's all a blur. Fast forward. Uncle's funeral comes and goes. His old room is cleaned and emptied of all furniture. The door to his room is always kept closed. Nobody goes in there for months. I wake up from a terrible dream one night. In the dream, I'm standing in Uncle's doorway. He's sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at me. His wrists are slashed to hell. His arms are abnormally long in the dream, so it makes them look even worse. Ceiling fan is creaking repetitively, spinning above me. Creak, creak, creak. I sit up in bed. I'm awake now. But I still hear that sound. Creak, creak. I lay there a sec listening to it. I'm not imagining it. For some reason I slip out of bed and into the hall. Looking back, I didn't feel in control of my own body at the time. I approach Uncle's bedroom door. On the other side, I can hear the ceiling fan spinning loudly, clear as day. The image of Uncle from my dream pops into my head. Picture his long arm reaching over to open the door. For whatever reason I turn the handle. Push door open slightly, peek inside. The room is empty. Sigh of relief. Look up at the fan. It isn't even on. Creak, creak, creak. WTF. I suddenly panic and try to close the door. But at the last second I feel someone tug on it from the other side, keeping it from closing. Fuck this, abandon ship. Rush to my room. Jump under the covers. Think I hear the door close, but my heart is beating in my ears, so maybe I imagined it. Lay there for a long time listening to the creaking sound until I pass out from exhaustion/fear. Here's a story that I've never shared before. It's not really paranormal, but it scares the living shit out of me. 17 years old, been smoking weed regularly with a couple of guys from college. I'm from the UK, we start college at 16, for a year now. One of the guys usually drives and we smoke up in this field that's deserted at night. Driver gets a call from someone. He starts freaking out, literally laying on the floor screaming down the phone. Never heard screaming like that before, it was fucking terrifying. He's not even making sense, he's like writhing around on the floor and screaming down the phone. Starts doing this weird fucking laughing, all bug-eyed and weird. Calmly puts his phone in his pocket. Climbs very tall fence for a tennis court. Jumps off, lands on his neck and fucking kills himself. Guy I hung around with every day for a year just UPS and kills himself because of a phone call and none of us know who it was on the other end. I wish I was making this up, but it fucked me up for a while afterwards. The other guy we were with started using ketamine regularly. We're both 21 now and he's completely screwed in the head. I was on medication for a while afterwards, shitty citalopram, but came off it quickly. The police put it down to a stoned idiot climbing the fence, they interviewed us both once and that was it. I never even heard from his family, they moved out of the county pretty quickly. I still have his younger brother on Facebook. I've buried the memory somewhere in my brain and just try to ignore it, but whenever my phone rings and I don't have the number saved then I always get a horrible feeling and I never answer. I'm not even explaining how fucking weird this guy was acting when he answered his phone, it was horrible. The fucking noises he was making were so fucking disgusting. I can't even try to explain it because it makes me feel physically sick. I don't expect to be believed, I'm just going to tell the story and go. 19/M/AZ. When I was young I had to live with my dad in a caravan park in the desert at the edge of some dirt poor hick towns. Pick sadly related. The people there were basically 100% white trash burnouts. The most depressing kind of environment for a kid to grow up in. Dad was alright, he drank but wasn't angry, worked a lot and didn't really care what I did. He was a demolition worker and would sometimes be gone for days at a time. During these times I would stay in this one van with a family of 3 who we were pretty close to. There was the dad, John, and the 2 sons, one my age, Michael, and one a year younger, who, no shit, was called Dog. Now even in that setting Dog was a weird name. Like there were literally people with the name Cletus there and even they laughed at the name Dog. But the family was really nice nonetheless. I hardly saw the dad because he worked and drank like my own father, so it was usually me, Michael and Dog mucking around at the caravan camp doing whatever we liked. Michael and Dog were nice kids but I'd had a little bit of education having spent a few years with my mom in the city, and by comparison these kids were pretty simple. Their idea of fun was catching lizards and mashing them up with sticks. Which was a good way to kill time, though. They also had a PS1 with some games but it always glitched out. The main thing I remember about hanging around them was the smell of their caravan in the heat. This really rancid stench would build up as we played PlayStation or mashed lizards or whatever, the hotter the day the worse it was. So one day I asked them what the smell is all about and they said they'd show me. So they take me into the back section of the caravan, which is cordoned off from the rest by one of those sparkly bead curtains, and that's how I found out their dad was into taxidermy. There were buckets of roadkill and his taxidermy handiwork lined the walls. The windows had been fully taped over with black duct tape and it was actually bubbling in the heat, leaking this thick plastic type smell that mixed in with the smell of meat. I saw most of the taxidermied animals were lizards and realized why they were all about killing lizards. I was creeped out, but after a time I didn't notice the stench so bad and became interested in how well crafted the animals were. The sculptures all had real craftsmanship and talent, or so I thought as a kid. In retrospect they were pretty crude. So I'm admiring the taxidermy when the door slams shut and I almost shit myself when John is standing over me, staring hard at me and his kids. But then he just bursts out smiling and acting like a giddy child eager to know what I think. He seemed so happy when I said I liked it. I genuinely did like it too. As a kid you sort of don't have a broad enough awareness of social norms to know that taxidermy is pretty creepy. Another thing I didn't notice at the time was that even thought he was incredibly nice and warm to his sons. They both acted totally submissive and treated his every word as an order. When he asked if I would like a beer, for instance, they both said yes sir in tune and rushed to the fridge. but he just laughed and they were smiling, so I didn't suspect anything was wrong. That night we made a small fire outside and all got drunk. Me, Michael and Dog were kids, so it didn't take much. We huddled around the fire as John enthusiastically started telling us the story of how Dog was born. He'd had a truly beautiful mother, he said, who loved Michael more than the world. Michael didn't remember his mother and the story made him sad. Their mother and John had lived in a nice house in a different state, and when she got pregnant a second time it was like a miracle, he said. Then a glaze crossed over his eyes and his voice got whimpery. But before Dog was born, Mother had buckled to the floor and blood was coming out of her. And when they got to the hospital, no sooner had Dog been born was she dead. We all got a bit teary-eyed, John especially. He hugged his son Dog. "Mommy died so we could have you, my baby boy," he said, and his son cried. They both cried and held each other. But I noticed Michael was smiling widely. He turned to me and said, "Daddy's going to make everything all right again." Hearing him, his father said, "Yes, Sue, I will make everything all right again." And they had me join them in a family hug. As we hugged, something bad happened. John suddenly yelled and thrust us all off him. He smashed his bottle on the ground and breathing heavily. Dog tentatively approached him and starting asking what was wrong. His father turned to him with wild eyes as bright as the fire and screamed at him not to talk like that. "What did I tell you about talking, Dog?" Dog started stammering, falling over his own feet into the gravel. I was too woozy to think straight, and as I watched this horrible sign, Michael put his hand on my knee and squeezed. John approached the boy and hit him on the neck until he cried out in protest, making John hit him again and scream. "What did I tell you? Dogs don't talk." And Dog, on his hands and knees, tears running down his face, started whimpering like a pup. And then he was barking. And then howling. John hit him again on the neck and said louder. Dog, living up to his namesake, frantically whooped and barked, running around in the sand on all fours. John seemed happy with this and seized the boy under the stomach. He sharply ordered his other son to follow and they disappeared inside. Before he left, Michael shot me a big grin, the same smile he'd given when he said everything would be all right. For a long time I didn't see them. I told my father about what happened and he said he'd talk to John about his drinking, but that was all he could do. "You can't tell people what's good for them," he said resignedly. I saw Michael a couple more times, killing lizards behind my caravan. We exchanged hellos but nothing more. Then I saw him one more time, a few days later, on one of the hottest days I remember. He looked really satisfied and was strutting around the caravan lot whistling to himself. When I approached, I saw that he was holding a small blade, glinting with fresh redness. "Killing lizards?" I asked tentatively. He winked, grinned big and said, "Just making some final adjustments." And he walked off. As he did so, I heard a slow, awful moan from behind their caravan. It was the guttural wail of an animal. But before I could reach it, there was the sound of the door slamming, and only twin peals of blood droplets were left in the sand. Many weeks passed. One day, I was home alone when there was a knock at the door. I opened it and saw John, standing and smiling. His appearance struck an instant unease in me, but he started apologizing for the night I had witnessed, and seemed very genuine. He talked about how his drinking was out of hand and he really shouldn't have gone off around me. He wanted me to know that things were finally getting better, and wanted me to come over and see them all. Half out of fear, half out of childish naivete, I followed him. "I really am sorry, he should know not to act that way." He kept saying, "But things are finally getting back to normal. It's been a long road, and a hard one, but things are finally coming full circle." I noted that now all the windows had been blacked out. He opened the door and shut it behind me. Inside it smelled worse than ever. I almost gagged at the fecal stench, the burned plastic and mincemeat. And it was hard to see too, the whole place was dimmed out through the taped up windows. A cloud of foul-smelling steam hung in the air. I looked down and saw Michael, casually sprawled on a mattress playing PlayStation, as if unaware of the changes. He was excited to see me. "Hey man. Things have gotten so much better. It's been a long road, and a hard one, but it's finally getting back to the way things were." He was grinning like he could hardly contain himself. Him and his father kept exchanging sneaky smiles. I noticed he was wearing a shirt and pants many sizes too big for him. "Who's up for a beer?" he announced. His dad jokingly responded, "Yes sir, man of the house," and bent down to get some cans out. Michael shot me a look like we were both in on a big joke. I tried to ignore the noises coming from behind the bead curtain, but he sensed it on me and said, "Wait till you see it. Our brand new dog." Michael passed through the curtain in few steps. I felt John press a cold beer into my hand and his palm against my back, pushing me through the beads and into the taxidermy room. The smell was all-pervading. Bowls of meats lay around the floor, some visibly glistening with maggots. The buzzing off flies half melted into the window filled the place. And in the corner of the room, overlooked by the stuffed heads of the animals, was a kennel. The rest was like a fever dream. Michael's voice was insonorous and far away as he said, "Out, dog, out." John stood in the corner, pride swelling in his face. And then it was shuffling out of its kennel, one paw after the next. The brand new dog. It was John's best work by far. The unsteady, wobbling walk was achieved through 2 cuts to the wrists and ankles, very small. I remembered the blade and the droplets in the sand. His hands and feet dragged pathetically behind him as he lurched forward. A diagram of wires covered the body, performing functions I could only guess at. The back was bent into the curved shape of a dog, and the head jutted forward from a neck enmeshed in chicken wire and wounds. But the face was the masterpiece. The jaws had been stretched out in a contraption looking like a mouth guard, that sturdied itself with thick pylons in the gums, split down the middle so the entire tongue was permanently flapping out, dripping. The nose had been, it seemed, flattened into shape, and the open nasal cavities were thickly coated with wetness. The ears, dragged back towards the shoulders with chicken wire, were now long and pointed, stretching the whole head into a brand new shape. The only thing that remained untouched were dog's terrified eyes, from which I saw were bleeding streams of tears. "Good boy," Michael was saying, kneeling to dog's level, "that's a good dog." Then he struck it on the back so that it buckled over. "Stop that," he ordered, "dogs don't cry." Well trained, dog let out a series of woeful howls. Michael, pleased, pushed a bowl towards him, and dog, eyes unblinking, eagerly dipped his face straight into it and lapped it up. Michael and John stood side by side, the father with his hand on his son's shoulder. "You did great, son," John said, "everything's almost all right again. Everything will be back to normal now." Michael nodded. "Now son, it's time to put down the dog." John gingerly helped his son grip the rifle steady, helping his fingers around the grip and the trigger. I couldn't move. Not even a foot away from me dog was lapping up slop, his extended snout dripping with rotten meat. I could feel the heat of his body, I was so close. Michael steadied himself with the big gun, obviously not used to its weight. He stumbled back once, his father gently helped him back up. I couldn't feel my own body anymore. Only the smell, the heat, the dog. That's it, John was saying, helping his son to aim. "Dog," Michael clicked, "come here boy." With horrible slowness dog turned on his spindle legs toward his brother. As Michael crooned good boy, the most awful sound emanated from somewhere inside the dog's throat, the gurgled sound of attempts at human speech in between half-formed barks and whimpers. As the blast exploded through the air, I passed out. When I came to, the gunpowder smell was still heavy in the air. I groggily took in the scene, a lumpen mess on the floor that had once been dog, John, beaming at it, and Michael looking for once strangely serious, as if something had occurred to him just too late. As I slowly began twitching my fingers, urging any sort of movement out of my deadened body, John placed a hand on his son's shoulder and said, "It's finally over, son. It's back to the way things were." For a moment, Michael looked at him, confused. Then he suddenly struck his hand hard with the butt of the gun against the wall. There was an audible crunch. My leg twitched. John looked genuinely hurt and went to grab the gun off his boy, but he yanked it out of reach. "Son, what are you dash?" "Stop that," Michael screamed, "don't do that." I began to inch across the floor, pushing my deadweight body with weak leg thrusts. John lurched forward forcefully, "Give it to me, you little cunt dash." There was a second blast and John fell to the ground, screaming and hollering. Thick black smoke and a new, richer texture to the flesh smell wafted out. His whole foot was gone. Wasting no time, Michael leapt upon him on all fours, brandishing the little blade from earlier. John was crying and yelling as I pushed myself out of the doorway. Working fast, Michael carved through the Achilles tendon in his left ankle, which loosened with a slight pop. John screamed again. I pushed through the jangly bead curtain. There was the sound of wrestling in the room, and more screaming. "Son, for fuck's sake, stop this." As I hobbled, half paralyzed, onto my knees and opened the door, I heard for the last time, "Stop that. Dogs. Don't talk." The caravan was gone within days. My father didn't know what to believe when I tried telling him the story. I was delirious from shock and had to be taken to hospital. When my mother found out about the nights spent at hospital, she flew in to take me back. I spent the next 7 years systematically forgetting certain things about my time with my father. I managed to pick up at school after a long time spent as a suspected mute or something. Even made friends, eventually. I receive little correspondence from my father. He remains at the same caravan park to this day. One day I got a call from him saying a young man had been by asking for me. He was sad to hear I no longer lived there. He asked to leave a message, went goes as follows. "Dear Anon, it's been 15 dog years since we last met, but just wanted to let you know the old bitch is still kicking. I've made some big improvements since you last saw her. Hope everything's alright with you too." I never heard of him again. Jesus Christ, reading this thread I can't help but think my own personal whatever-itis might be one on these. Quick rundown of what's going on. Tall, dark man, wears a plague doctor's mask. Comes to me every night between the hours of 3 and 5 a.m. I can't speak, move, etc. I can only move my eyes. He stands right at the side of my bed mostly, sometimes he's hovering directly above me, can't always see him perfectly. Fucking talks to me, usually about my activities or general thoughts throughout the day. For example, he's asked me about my writing, what I want to do this summer, how I'm going to live after I eventually move out, when I'll finally go camping, etc. He knows I can't answer and just prattles on for maybe 10 minutes a day, usually gives sound advice if I need it. He even knows when I've told people about him and has called me out on it before, but doesn't mind so much. This has been going on since August 2011, and only in the last 6 months has it become a nightly thing. Used to only be every couple of nights. I've also had some really fucked up paranormal encounters where he's come to me after the fact and told me things about what it was I saw/heard/whatever. Sometimes he'll even warn me before I go places or tell me about things I didn't even know I was near. I don't think he's evil by any means, but I can't really say he's my guardian or some shit. He just seems like a friendly passerby that won't leave. Pic related, closest thing Google Images had to him. Same Anon, still bored enough to be on /x/, bumping with a couple of stories. Condensing them as best I can, but there are 3 of them and I have a deadline tomorrow, so I'm going to make this quick. If anybody gives half a fuck, feel free to say so and validate my existence. December 2011. A friend of my mother's is moving into a new house, her husband is away on business. And she's pregnant. Asks me to help unload stuff, set up the house and clean. The neighborhood isn't great, so she asks me to spend the night because she doesn't want to risk anything happening while she's alone. I get an airbed on first floor in the living room that has sliding glass doors leading to the backyard and no curtains to speak of. The house has been giving me the creeps all day, lots of clunking and shit coming from the pipes. Can't sleep, end up laying there until about 1:30 a.m., there is literally no sound coming from anywhere. Suddenly I hear the side door opening in the kitchen 20 feet away. I'm frozen fucking solid and in a cold sweat. Can hear load shuffling heading up the stairs, pretty sure it was plastic grocery bags. Goes up and never comes down. Don't sleep, my doctor friend visits at his usual time. Says only one thing to me. Don't move. I can see him sort of glide off into the other room where the staircase is. A minute later and there's this ungodly screeching coming from upstairs followed up by the violent clunking of the pipes from earlier. Second part. Don't sleep all night after that. The next day the pregnant chick wakes up, her own airbed was on the other side of the living room in the corner, and tells me I look like shit. Explain to her what happened last night. Calls bullshit but is still a little freaked, sends me upstairs with baseball bat. Shit's a fucking mess. Windows were broken, there was a hole punched in the wall, some of the boxes were ripped up by what looked like a dog or cat, the fucking toilet seat in the upstairs bathroom was snapped in half and the back lid of the toilet was completely gone. Didn't find anybody or anything though. Call the cops finally. They tell us it was probably just some hobo looking for a place to crash. That day the chick's husband comes home and I go back to my own place. That night when the doc comes for his nightly checkup, he tells me I was lucky I didn't open the closet when I was up there. Don't even fucking go back to that place. July 2012, the couple moves out. 3 weeks later. Some dude is killed at the place and it makes the local paper. Clawed to death by a bear in the backyard, there was no fence and the place is near the woods. Once again, the doc comes and tells me it was no bear. My fucking face during the whole ordeal. And another. June 2012. Perfect weather to go in a woods. Decide to fuck it and camp behind my house, since this is a fairly woodsy state, WA. Gear up, go out and set up camp about a mile out. All goes well until nightfall. Fucking shit, I forgot the flashlight, why am I so autistic? Like an idiot I go back to my house to get one. Easily make it back even in the dark because I've been out this way a million times. Grab flashlight and the lantern, then head back outside through the back door. Standing at the edge of the woods is this motherfucker. Like, I don't even fucking know what it was, certainly not an animal from around here. Long ass legs, down on all fours, skinny as shit, long neck, no hair anywhere. It's standing right at the start of the path I always use to go in a woods. And it's looking right at me. Jesus fucking Christ, that is a big mouth. Slowly back up to the door, not taking my eyes off the thing. Open it up and go back inside, lock the door. Shove a chair in front of it and turn on all the lights. That night I don't even lay down to go to sleep. The doc comes anyway, I'm frozen in front of my computer. Don't go back. Don't go back into the woods for 2 days, leaving all my shit out there. I grab a couple of buddies to come with me because I'm a pussy. We get to my campground and there's nothing left but my torn up sleeping bag. No trace of anything else in the area, no footprints, no markings, nothing but the cotton from my gutted sleeping bag. I never went back to that spot and there's no force on earth that can make me. Last story, coming up. Last week. Try going urban exploring because I'm a dumb shit. Had this one place pegged for the last couple of months, posted on /x/before about it, pic related. Wait until nighttime, grab gear, my camera is dead though, picture is about 2 months old, took it when I was out scouting for places. This is about half a mile away from my house in the opposite direction of the campground in my previous story, so I figure there's no chance of running into it. The night before, the doc comes to me and tells me to be quiet. Spend all day wondering what the fuck he meant. Shrug it off and set out for the warehouse. Get inside, loads of old equipment laying around, all rusted to hell and back because the roof is shit and leaks like a horny bitch. Really deep inside there's this makeshift skate park, ramps, and crap made of wood and chunks of concrete. Really wishing I had my camera right now. Suddenly footsteps. I duck behind a pile of crap in the corner by one of the doors. Two guys walk in from the other side of the room dressed in black, talking about I don't know what. Another guy comes in from the door to my left with a black plastic bag. He greets the other two coldly, then throws the bag at them. The two open it up, whisper something to each other and throw it back. Final part. The guy with the bag says with a heavy Irish accent, "All in place for the delivery." One of the two in black just nods, the other has his cell phone out and is typing something. Irish guy says it's been a pleasure, gents, then turns on his heels and leaves the way he came. The two guys in black just stand around for a few minutes, seemingly for no fucking reason whatsoever before leaving. All this time I'm scared out of my mind, no idea what the fuck just happened. I wait another half an hour before leaving just to be safe. When I get home I call the cops but they never follow up. Trying to sleep that night was a nightmare. Didn't stop, doc. You need to stop sticking your nose in where it doesn't belong. I know you aren't trying to, but you simply must put in some effort against it. Still haven't bought a new camera so I can go back and take more pictures. And I still don't know what the fuck the doc is. Be a kid living in Western Canada. Make friends with a kid named Ryan. We would hang out for days on end and have sleepovers at his house. Only rule was we couldn't go upstairs, so we hung out in the basement playing SNES and NES games. One day he invites me to go camping with him and his father. Spend the days doing cool shit like riding his little 50 cubic centimeters dirt bike, swimming in the lake, throwing stones at squirrels. One night his dad starts to get drunk. He was always a pretty nice guy but rough around the edges. Starts talking nonsense about his brother being in the woods. Gets even more drunk. Now he's getting violent and unpredictable. Builds a huge fire to illuminate the woods around us. He's convinced that there's someone out there fucking with us. Tells us to go into the tent and go to sleep. We lay there listening to him losing his goddamn mind to whatever he thinks is out there. Fire is getting bigger. Suddenly hear banging. Ryan always had a stash of small Chinese firecrackers. It could have been those but I couldn't tell. He proceeds to continue this insane shit all night. Eventually we fall asleep. Wake up. His dad is in a hurry to leave. Now apparently sober. We ride in the camper talking about how much fun we had and don't mention the last night. Get back to town. His dad sends me home. Ask Ryan if he wants to hang out. He says we can't anymore because his dad said so. Convince him to come play elsewhere so his dad wouldn't know. His dad finds us. Violently grabs Ryan and leaves, cursing at me. The next day Ryan isn't at school. Find out that they had suddenly moved away. I'm not sure what the fuck happened that night, but Ryan was a true bro. The Bloop was an ultra-low frequency underwater sound recorded by NOAA in 1997. It was unlike any other sounds ever recorded underwater, due to its frequency and the fact it was recorded by other sensors thousands of miles from its estimated source. It is consistent with other marine animal noises due to its rapidly changing frequency, but it would be an animal many times larger than the blue whale, the largest animal to ever exist. The consensus by most scientists is that it was caused by geological activity. Oh, that's the black carpet. Allegedly, a bit of an urban legend amongst deep-sea divers. I'm that diver Anon if anyone was in the last deep-sea thread. I've heard about this thing a couple times from co-workers and buddies. I don't remember the details of the full story right now to be honest, but I'll talk to my buddy sometime and see if he remembers and post them on here. But the basic gist that I can remember is that this thing is some sort of colony organism, like a giant moving coral. It's a giant black carpet of macrobiotic cells that crawls over the ocean floor, sifting those nutrients with millions of tiny feelers. Nobody has ever gotten a good estimate of the size other than it's big, and apparently it makes a noise similar to this bloop thing. One guy apparently saw it swimming/riding the currents as well, so it does more than just crawl on the ocean floor. I suppose you could call it a one-of-a-kind organism, but I'm not sure if that applies to colony organisms like this. Essentially, yes. According to how the black carpet has been described to me, it shares many similarities to a jellyfish. One story I heard had a diver getting stung by some sort of large feeler strand that apparently hangs off the top, similar to a jellyfish. There was this really old retired diver I talked to who claimed to have seen it. He claimed to have seen an entire decomposing sperm whale being consumed by the carpet. I should really make a post compiling all the stories I've heard about this thing. So I talked to my buddy and I'm going to start writing up some of the stories I've heard about the black carpet. This is the first story I heard of it, from some Finnish bloke with a strong accent. He was doing a deep sea dive repairing some sort of cable. I assume it was probably fiber optic. As he told it, initially he thought he was in the wrong spot because he couldn't find the cable anywhere. He starts searching and eventually finds one end, just the one. Sheared clean through. He gets his dive buddy to stay with that end of the line while he goes looking for the other end, swimming in a straight line in the direction of the other line. In his estimation, he swam about half a mile before he found the other end of the line. He stressed to me that the entire half a mile middle section of the line was just completely gone. It was a huge deal and everyone thought it was the Russians, but this guy was sure that this carpet thing had done it. Said he heard the noise it apparently makes, even thought he never saw it. This next story is from my buddy. He heard it from a guy who heard it from another guy who heard it from another guy, so take it with a heavy grain of salt. This guy is doing a dive. Depth, location, what he was doing never got specified. Just that he was really deep. He starts hearing this odd noise that gets associated with the carpet a lot. The way he described was similar to that video of the bloop. Ultra low pitch, sort of like a super creepy distorted whale song. As he gets closer he hears this almost static crackling noise as well. The way he described it was like a million prawns getting cracked open at once, if that makes any difference. As he gets closer to the bottom, the noises are getting louder and louder. At this point he was thinking that he's hearing some sort of sonar from a submarine and that some jackass submarine crew is playing a joke on him. When the guy gets to the bottom he shines his light around, trying to find whatever he's looking for. And what he was that the seafloor had literally come to life and was crawling past him. This is probably the best description of the carpet you're going to get. According to this guy, carpet is at least a mile long/wide. Made mostly of these strange black feelers that apparently make the strange popping noise. Most of the top is covered in various sand, rocks, debris, with feelers poking through. Also a few long transparent stalks, as he described them, that float upwards. Apparently some of these were like 20 feet long. According to the guy it was singing, which doesn't make any fucking sense to me, but whatever. Guy swam back up to the surface and claimed he had an equipment malfunction. Came back down a couple hours later and got there just in time to see the last of the thing disappear. Apparently it stretched as far as the eye could see. Which isn't that far at the bottom of the ocean, but still. This one is an old urban legend that's been floating around the diving community for years. Never heard a concrete source of it, so it probably never happened. Especially since it involves a submarine crew, so I'm not sure how a diver would have heard about it, since as far as I know submarine crews usually stay inside their ship. Anyway, here goes. Submarine is doing something, either war games, or patrolling for Chinese/Russian/North Korean/bad guy submarines. The story isn't terribly consistent about this, I hear it different every single time. For whatever reason, they are not using active sonar because they want to avoid detection, floating dead somewhere a couple hundred meters off the seafloor. They're just sitting there, chilling and listening with their sensors trying to detect enemy submarines or whatever, when they start hearing the noise. Their sensors can't make any sense of it, and it's getting louder at an alarming rate. Starts out as something only the sensors can hear, but before long the entire crew is hearing this strange, distorted humming/singing that people always associate with the carpet. Captain thinks the only explanation is that it's some sort of new sonar/jamming technology and order the sonar crew to send out a ping to locate the source of the noise. This is the part of the story that stays the most consistent, I assume because it's the most memorable. The sonar operator shouts out new sonar contact, bearing. Sir. What's our depth? The captain replies, 500 m or whatever depth the submarine is supposed to be at. The sonar operator replies. But sir, the sonar says the seafloor is 10 m below us. The captain says that's nonsense, then walks over to the sonar station. Checks the reading, then walks over to the helmsman and checks the depth. Checks the nautical charts for where they are. Somehow apparently, the ocean has gotten about 200 m shallower. The captain orders another ping from the sonar to try and locate the source of the noise. Sonar operator speaks up again, concerned. Sir, the ocean is getting deeper again. Captain asks him to repeat himself. Ocean floor is once again at expected depth, sir. Captain takes a look for himself and sure enough, they are no longer 10 m above the ocean floor. There is also a very, very large dot on the screen behind the submarine. Captain asks what the large contact is. Sonar operator, equipment malfunction, sir. Captain pings again, just out of curiosity. The equipment malfunction has maintained its shape and is continuing to move away from the submarine, and apparently taking the strange noise with it. Again, this is basically an old wives' tale amongst deep-sea divers, so take it with a grain of salt. It's possible that a submarine detected the carpet or whatever on sonar and that's the origin of the story, but I highly doubt this actually happened. Still makes for a cool story though. Last story for now, I'll see if I can dig up some more later. This is from the old guy I talked about earlier. Nice guy, marine biologist who has done both deep-sea welds and nature research/studies with ROVs. Apparently the carpet ate one of his ROVs on an expedition. According to him, it happened late one night while the rest of the crew was sleeping. He was pulling an all-nighter studying the sea life around volcanic vents. He's moving the ROV from one vent area to the next when he sees what he described as churning sediments on the seafloor, a giant moving cloud of underwater dust essentially moving towards the ROV. He moves in closer and sees what he describes as colossal echinoderm crawling along the seafloor, with long, dexterous filament probing the seafloor ahead of it. He maneuvers the ROV in for a closer look and uses the arm to prod one of the filaments. In the blink of an eye he lost contact with the ROV. Apparently it happened so fast he didn't even see it happen. 1 second the thing was about 5 m away from the vehicle, the next second it had swallowed the thing whole. His excuse for not having footage was that the footage was all recorded and stored on the ROV rather than being recorded on the operating station, which seems fishy to me. He was, however, very confident in himself. To the extent he claims that he is the discoverer of this new species. He even gave it a name, which I completely forgot because it was so stupid and boring. Giant sea carpet sounds cooler anyway. The way I've heard it described, it shares more similarities with a starfish or sea anemone than a jellyfish. The marine biologist guy who said he'd seen it had some interesting thoughts on what it was. His idea is that it's some sort of holdover/descendant from the very first invertebrate forms of life on Earth. He did a whole long talk about how coral is one of the oldest forms of life on the planet, and the reason why the ocean is the only place teeming with large invertebrate creatures is because that's where all life first evolved. In his mind, jellyfish and all other sea invertebrates probably evolved from this thing rather than vice versa. This giant sea carpet or whatever would have been one of those very first life forms to ever exist on Earth, technically making it one of our ancient ancestors. It's a pretty cool theory, all things considered. Way back in the mid-1980s I read in a book on cryptids that there was something called the hide. Apparently it was a flattish thing with eyes along the rim, about the size of a large cowhide, hence the name. From what I recall, the one observation was of such a creature rising up out of an underwater trench to absorb a shark who'd somehow become paralyzed by it. It was observed at some distance by a diver. Does any of that ring a bell to anyone? Supposedly took place somewhere off the Pacific coast of South America. I've heard some people who claim to have seen that thing or other similar things. A lot of stuff I've heard from other divers seems like they could be attributed to very rare/large siphonophores that live in the deep sea. What you're talking about was described to me as a sort of pancake-shaped creature that would hide under the sand with a single small near-transparent tentacle floating upwards. A diver touched it, spasmed, and immediately the creature rose out of the sand to devour him. Don't touch strange shit in the ocean, people. May as well go on a tangent and talk about some other stories I've heard that might be attributed to siphophores. There was this one cranky old retired diver who swore he'd seen a sea monster of unfathomable size on a dive once. I always assumed he was full of shit, but the way he described it sounds a lot like a siphonophore. The story went something like this: he was on a dive doing something that I've forgotten when he sees an absolutely giant tentacle stretching up from the nearby drop-off. The thing was so huge he couldn't see no beginning nor end to it, and so now he goes around constantly claiming to have come within a hairbreadth of devourment by a gargantuan sea leviathan of unfathomable proportion. And yes, that is exactly how he talked. Looking into these siphonophores, it makes total sense that something like this could exist, though it would be less of a sea monster than a giant serpentine jelly blob sifting through plankton and floating nutrients. Another siphonophore-related story I've heard is one about an absolutely gargantuan jellyfish-type creature that was allegedly about the size of a military submarine. The diver who saw it said the thing was so massive it had somehow developed its own biosphere with various species of fish circling around and swimming inside it. He described it as having an appearance like a giant upside-down orchid suspended underneath a massive sphere of translucent jelly. The coloration was very dull, but that might have just been due to the extreme depth. This story is off on a bit of a tangent, very much out there in terms of believability. It's not a very widespread of widely believed story, mostly because of how crazy/supernatural it is. If you work as a diver for long enough, you're bound to run into a few people like this. Ultra superstitious guys who believe in all sorts of curses, black luck, sea monsters, etc. A common belief you'll find among many of them is the sea deity/god/demon called Davy Jones, who roams the seafloor searching for divers or sailors who have displeased him for one reason or another. Whenever someone or something is lost at sea and never recovered, Davy Jones has got it. What makes this/X/related is the description one guy gave me of this Davy Jones, because it's pretty spooky. The guy claimed to have seen on one of his dives a trail of giant footprints approximately as long in length as he was tall, so about 5.5 feet long, since the guy was pretty short. And though he'd never seen it himself, he claimed that one of his friends had. This Davy Jones was a bipedal humanoid that stood over 200 feet tall on tall, stalk-like limbs that was walking along the seafloor, kicking up great clouds of silt behind him as he walked. According to this guy, to look him in the face is instant death, for his visage be too horrifying for any mere human to behold. He was probably just fucking with me, but it's still a cool spooky story to put on here for you lads. I met the guy while I was working in the Hibernia oil field in 2009. Fun story: I refuse to do any oil rig work now because a lot of it is really sketchy and you end up having to pull a 10+ hour shift while doing very delicate work deep underwater, and I was afraid after that big Mexico oil spill that I'd fuck something up and cause a massive spill. So yeah, I don't do jobs like that anymore, even though they pay really well. Yes. Well, to be more specific, I saw a hallucination of my dead father because the oxygen injector on my rebreather malfunctioned on a dive and gave me a bad case of narcosis. I was definitely hallucinating, but it really felt like him, if that makes any sense. So I finally got hold of the old biologist guy on the phone and talked to him about the sea carpet again. According to him, it is not a siphonophore. He qualified that by saying that siphonophores are not fast or mobile. They survive by basically floating around, expending very little energy and occasionally snagging a meal with the neurotoxin stinger tentacles. He talked for a while about what makes the carpet seemingly a biological impossibility. According to him, something of that size wouldn't get enough food/energy to survive and keep up its level of activity just from scavenging sediments on the seabed. Siphonophores can get really huge because they sort of sit around and let food come to them without any energy expenditure. So the profile of the carpet fits more with an active predator/scavenger than a passive one. I mentioned to him that I'd heard stories about decomposing corpses of whales being seen by some people being digested by the carpet, and he got really excited about that. His working theory is that the carpet is an entirely unknown form of life, in the sense that it is a colony organism similar to a siphonophore, but the individual cells are much more complex and capable than those of a siphonophore. Keep in mind this is purely theoretical stuff he's pulling out of his ass to try and explain why something that should be physically/biologically impossible might exist. He studies siphonophores quite extensively, and one thing that remains a mystery is how the cells communicate, considering they have no central nervous system or brain to speak of. They're basically just big bacteria. The key, apparently, is high-frequency vibrations. He hasn't been able to prove it yet because it's damn hard to get your hands on a siphonophore to study, but he thinks the individual cells vibrate to communicate with one another and pass a message along the entire organism. His theory is that the carpet is basically the siphonophore equivalent of a Russian nesting doll. Rather than being a colony of individual cells, it is a colony of individual multicellular siphonophores and is therefore the missing link between single-celled life and complex multicellular life. The bloop noise which the carpet apparently makes is actually millions of these creatures communicating in their own primitive language. Since siphonophores can reproduce asexually, he envisions the carpet as constantly evolving in size and shape depending on the environment and amount of food it can consume. So perhaps after consuming the carcass of a very large creature like a whale or a giant squid, it would be extremely large and have a large amount of cells, but would eventually shrink as itself consumed unneeded cells. The multicellular structure of the carpet serves a twofold purpose, both serving as a distraction from potential predators similar to a lizard losing its tail while running away, and a long-term storage of nutrients. Since big meals are few and far between at the bottom of the ocean, the carpet stores the energy it consumes by creating more cells and growing larger, which it will consume between meals whenever it needs energy. Not just that, but he's very convinced that the very first forms of life on Earth evolved in the deep ocean near volcanic vents, making the carpet the oldest existing form of life on the planet by far. He talked my ear off for a while, but I don't have much more interesting to tell you guys other than this for now. Though I feel that even though this is /x/ and people come here to hear about supernatural/weird stories and shit, this is just the hypothesis of one guy who apparently saw the carpet once. It's by no means the definitive truth, and this guy hasn't ever actually been able to perform a real scientific study on it. He just saw it once and is drawing conclusions from what little knowledge he has. Be me. 37. Just had first baby. Baby has all its fingers and toes and its heartbeat is like a stallion, so I'm feeling pretty good about myself. Wife is beyond beat, but everything went well. Take the family home to start our new life. Wife is still beat and goes straight to bed. Father baby time. Sing and talk to baby. Starting to get tired, so I decide to feed the baby so we can get some rest. Grab pre-pumped beast milk from fridge. Feed baby and we both fall asleep. Wake up to baby crying but no more breast milk. Go upstairs to get wife. Wife is not in room. Very confused. Call wife but phone is off. Baby is still crying and hungry, so I decide to pack her up and get formula. Get home, baby is still crying, so I try to feed her. Baby won't eat. Figured I'd wait her out till she gets hungry enough to take the formula. I try to soothe the baby. Nothing works, cries get louder. All night this continues. Call wife again, phone still off. Eventually take baby to doctor because baby will not eat and will not stop crying. It's been 14 hours since me or baby have slept and baby has not eaten in that time. Waiting for doctor, the baby stops crying. I fall asleep. Nurse wakes me up and bring to doctor. Explain that baby has not slept or eaten in 14 hours. Doctor checks baby, baby seems okay and tells me to go home. He is sure baby will eat soon. Once home, baby starts wailing. Baby still won't eat. Baby still won't sleep. Baby just cries. Call wife, phone is now disconnected. Panic sets in. Call police. Police show up. Explain my case and they tell me not much they can do at the moment. Ask me if I'm feeling well, as I look like shit since I have not slept in 20 hours due to the baby crying non-stop. Police says he's glad as she must have wound down and not I should be able to get some sleep. WTF.jpg because baby is quiet and I did not even realize. Me and police wrap it up and they leave. Baby starts to cry again once they pull out driveway. Defeat sets in. Baby won't eat. Baby won't sleep. Only cry. Eventually bring baby back to doctor. Once again explain that the baby has not slept in over 24 hours, no or eaten, and literally has not stopped crying. Doctor check baby. Baby is quiet, alert and seems great. Doctor tells me it very unlikely that what I say is true due to how the baby is at the moment. Doctor giving me looks but give me some anxiety meds, a number to call, and says even men can have issues like this. Sends me home again. Baby start crying the second I through the door. I start to laugh. Baby won't eat. Baby won't sleep. 48-hour mark, I bring baby to a different doctor. Tell them it's been over 48 hours since the baby has slept or eaten. Check baby. They don't believe me and tell me it's impossible. Not wanting to do this anymore with the fear of something happening to me or the baby, I tell them I'm just tired, which I was, and that I forgot that she did sleep and eat. I go home. Baby starts crying. 5 days and I've only slept a handful of hours. Baby does not need sleep. Baby does not need food. Baby just cries. Can't deal, gonna snap. I drive 400 miles to drop baby off fire station, but I can't. Take baby to local ER one last time. Once inside, baby stops crying. I lost it. Demand doctors check baby as she has not eaten or slept a week. Police show up. I'm still losing it, demanding my baby gets checked thoroughly. Police calm me down and doctors allow me to stay and they check baby with blood work and a hydration test among other things. Doctors tell me baby is 110%. Meltdown in 3-2. Demand I be taken to the nut house and clam I am a danger to myself and others so I can speed it along. Just got to away from baby. End up in the loony bin for 3 years as I will not admit it was possible for a baby to not eat or sleep for over 5 days. Finally get out. Lost everything. Find out social services took baby to wife's parents after my episode. Call them. They are thrilled to hear from me. I ask if they have heard from their daughter and they tell me no. Then they directly jump into when will I be taking the child back. I tell them they don't even know what happened to me and I have to seen or talk to any of them in over 3 years. I have nothing, no job, no home, so I can't take the child. Father get upset and demands I come take the child. Hear a child screaming in the background with the grandmother yelling he needs to get this kid out of here. I say I will stop over. I arrive to their house in 2 days. No one's home. I open door and house is empty and quiet as a mouse. I look around and go upstairs. See a closed door with what seemed to be locked from the outside, but lock is now gone. Move over latch and open door. See a small child standing looking at a huge picture of my ex-wife that took up the whole wall. Child turn and looks at me. And started to scream. I fall over and break my finger backwards on the floor when I tried to catch myself. In extreme pain I wipe my hand to my chest, covering it up with my other hand as I try to get up and run. Right as run I look back at the door before it disappeared from my sight. I see her face. She smiling. By the time I reached the door I could hear her laughing. Running across street I get hit by car. Fuck me now, legs broken. Still can see house and child is now looking at me from window smiling. Ambulance shows up and I tell them there is a 3-year-old child in the home and it's empty. Police go in. Police come out. No child. They tell me no one's in the home. I promise them there is, and my eye has not left the front door since I stopped seeing her in the window. She must have went out the back. They tell me they thought of that, but back door lead to backyard that had a huge fence, no way kid could have climbed it. I want to see for myself and try to get up, but medics pull me down and take me to hospital. I never brought it up again. Wife, her parents, and the child have completely blinked out of existence. An officer did see me in the hospital asking about the kid I saw, but nothing ever came about it because I did not want to look crazy again. Be me. 6 years old. Come from an extremely poor family and live in a post-communist European shithole. Christmas of 1998. Instead of a stash of presents I got news about my parents dying in a car crash. Go to sleep after crying my eyes out. Wake up in the morning. There's a single box of chocolates there. Get freaked out but eat it anyway. Fast forward to today. Going through old shit stashed in the attic while looking for something. Find a weird wooden box. A ton of family photos. Spend an hour or two looking at them. Find this one. The date written on the back is 24.12.1998. What the actual fuck did I just find? Who took the goddamn photo? I was alone at home on that day. This is the story of how I first heard about the Osage Reign of Terror. It's also the story of a man named Daryl, whose grandson Frank told me the story. And it starts off with what Frank called a ghost storm. I'm working in Oklahoma for a month. Bossman unexpectedly gives everyone the next day off. With pay, nice. I'm at my motel that night. Sitting in the doorway, in a little collapsible chair, staring out at the field across from my room. It's late. Everyone else is asleep. I don't remember what I was thinking about, but at some point I hear a storm approaching. I love storms, so I sit there waiting for it. I hear it roll across the field towards me. It comes right up to my doorstep where I'm sitting. There is not a single drop of rain. In fact, the sky is perfectly clear, and I can see the stars. Not a cloud in sight. But I can literally hear what sounds like a heavy rain all around me. I kind of feel something brush past my face as the storm moves over the motel. Then everything goes quiet again. I wasn't spooked, just confused. Ended up concluding that it was probably some natural phenomenon, maybe electrical, because I definitely felt it around my face and hair. Next morning. It's my day off, so I get up late. Decide to hit up a diner down the road for some grub. I miss the breakfast rush, so it's a ghost town in there. Just me and some old man drinking coffee at the counter. He strikes up a conversation with me. Basic small talk bullshit. I mention the weird occurrence the night before. Keep in mind I'm still looking for a normal explanation. I ask the guy if he knows what it might have been. He seems interested. Asks me what I heard. I describe the sound to him. I mention how I thought it was a storm at first, but there was no rain. The old guy's looking at me real intently now. He asks if I felt anything. Yeah, I felt something on my face and hair, kinda like walking through spider webs. Long story short, he mentions how there are stories of a ghost storm that passes through the area. People describe it as an intense hissing that sounds just like heavy rainfall. Pretty much exactly what I heard. He says in the stories, the storm passes over the person and that's that. Talk about a lame fucking legend. I'm in Snoresville. But the guy seems interested that I apparently witnessed it. He says most stories are from long ago, none really from the present day. He also mentioned that the ghost storm is sometimes associated with death. Kinda like a banshee, I guess? For you clueless fuckers, people claim to hear the screech of a banshee, then later someone dies. I mentioned this to the old man. Suggest that maybe the ghost storm is some sort of electrical phenomenon. Maybe Europeans experienced it when they came over. Associated the loud noise with the banshee from back home. And boom, you've got the local legend he describes. I pat myself on the back for solving the mystery. But the guy says no. According to him, the legend goes back to a meeting between the Osage and the Cherokee. He tells me that he's actually part of the Osage Nation. His grandpa told him the legend as a kid. He used to tell it to us every year, he says, then he'd tell us about his own experiences. Okay, no more Snoresville. I love native history and I especially love native lore. I ask if he'd mind telling me his grandpa's stories. He's reluctant at first. It's really long, he says. There's kind of a lot to it. I tell him it's my day off, so I've got nothing but time. I have to prod him a bit, but he finally agrees. So he hobbles over to my booth, introduces himself as Frank, and slides into the seat across from me. Then he begins to tell me a crazy fucking story. It's got a lot of history, a bit of folklore, and a nice little murder mystery too. And it goes a little something like this. Cue, Native American drums. The Osage were once considered to one of the fiercest Native American tribes. At upwards of 6, they were much taller than most Europeans. And they loved raiding. Early on in American history, the fur trappers who were drawn near the Osage territories were constantly attacked and killed. The United States decides that it's time to stop playing around. So they arm the enemies of the Osage and encourage them to go to battle with each other. A series of intertribal skirmishes follow. Eventually the raids are quelled and the Osage are pacified. They ultimately sign a series of treaties with the US. And that, my friends, is the beginning of dark times for the Osage people. Soon after signing away their traditional lands, smallpox ravages the tribe. Right around this time, the US tells them, you guys gotta skedaddle. We need more room for white settlers. Most of the Osage lay dead or dying. The rest are forcibly moved out west into Cherokee territory where the survivors make rough camps. The land's not very good for farming. The Osage begin to starve. Then the American Civil War breaks out. At the same time, the Cherokee and the Creek are vying for control over native tribal politics. They fight bloody battles against each other. The Osage are right in the middle of all of this, surrounded by war and starving to death. As if to add insult to injury, the United States never paid them what they were owed for their traditional lands. This once proud tribe of fierce warriors doesn't even have a place that they can call their own. When the wars were over, the Osage sent a delegation to Washington, D.C. They plead their case. They beg the United States to honor its debt, and to pay the Osage what they're owed for giving up their ancestral home. Congress debates the matter. And they decide the Osage have a point. A resolution is passed. The US honors its debt and pays the Osage in full. The tribe is saved. But they still need a home. The Osage decide they'll use some of the money they received to purchase the piece of the Cherokee reservation that they've been occupying all this time. But the Cherokee are hesitant to sell. They tell the Osage a really weird story. The land they're attempting to buy is home to a mysterious spirit. The Cherokee encountered it during the famous Trail of Tears. They heard it passing overhead one day, like thunder. It seemed to be following them. Its presence was like the roar of a river, and it scared the people. But their medicine man assured them. "It's just an old spirit," he said, "it doesn't like being disturbed." They asked him what sort of spirit it was. "It protects the land, and it is the land," he said. He told them all to keep marching and to stay out of its way, and it would leave them alone. The medicine man was old, and he died not long after that. But the Cherokee did as he said. They kept away from the place where the spirit was most often heard. Over time, they simply stopped speaking of it altogether. The elders broke this taboo to warn the Osage. The land they were trying to purchase that's where the spirit lived. Obviously the Osage are a little scared by this. But they're also not deterred. They've been living on that land now for quite a while, and they've never encountered the spirit the Cherokee speak of. Besides, they need a home, and they don't know what else to do. They insist on purchasing the land, and the Cherokee eventually sell. The Osage Reservation is born. And they lived happily ever after, right? Yeah, not exactly. Settlers continued to push further west. The Osage were concerned that ultimately they'd be shoved off their land again. The elders came together for a meeting to decide what to do. It's during this meeting, according to legend, that a spirit appeared to them. It was just how the Cherokee described it. The spirit's presence was like the roaring of a river. The spirit told the Osage that dark days still lay ahead. That their home would be occupied by foreigners. That the land would be ripped apart and ravaged. It told them that it had watched over this place for a very long time, guarding it. But its time was coming to an end. It told the elders that they would need to watch over the land themselves now. And in exchange for taking on this burden, the spirit would reveal something to them that would allow the Osage to maintain control over their home. So the elders listened as the spirit explained everything. When it was finished, the spirit told them that it would always be there in the land, and that the Osage needed to remember it. Then it left. The sound of the roaring river left with it. The Osage leaders were amazed. One more time, they sent a delegation to Washington, D.C. This time they didn't go to beg and plead. They went to negotiate. Following the spirit's advice, they sacrificed their land. They opened it for outsiders to use on the condition that the Osage would retain the rights to the subsurface of their reservation. The federal government agreed and passed a resolution sealing the deal. The terms laid out by the Osage meant that any minerals that might be discovered on their land, tin, gold, whatever, belonged to the Osage people. And as it turned out, their reservation was sitting on a gold mine. Not literal gold. Black gold. One of the largest oil deposits in the entire United States. The Osage Nation was rich. The riches were evenly divided among the tribal members. Every Osage man and woman was given an equal share of the oil. This equal share was called a head right. Upon death, one's head right would go to the next of kin. Everything changed for the Osage overnight. Luxury cars and chauffeurs, fine clothes, you name it. And that's where Daryl comes in. Frank tells me that lifestyle attracted some real bad people. My grandpa told me all about it. Daryl, Frank's grandpa, lived next door to a woman named Anna. She was a friendly, talkative lady, nice as could be. She was also Daryl's closest friend. Normally, she'd be out in the yard tending her garden. But one day Daryl doesn't see her all day. He doesn't find this odd at first. He knows for a fact that Anna went to her sister's house the night before. Usually she's back the same night, but maybe she stayed. But a couple of days pass and Anna's still not back. Daryl's worried. He decides to pay Anna's sister a visit to make sure everything's okay. She was here the other night, Anna's sister tells Daryl, but she left. I thought she went home. Now Daryl's really worried. He suspects the worst. He marches up to the sheriff's office and reports Anna missing. A few days later, Anna is found. Or rather, her body is. Down in a gulch, gunshot to the back of the head. Daryl and Anna's sister go down to identify the body together. It's hard on both of them. 4 days afterward, Daryl can't get the image out of his head. Anna's lifeless face. She actually looked at peace. He thinks about Anna's final moments, imagining what it must have been like for her. He weeps. And that's just the beginning. When Anna's body is found, her head right goes to her mother. But 2 months later, her mother turns up dead too. Even stranger, the sheriff's office has ruled Anna's death as accidental. Accidental, my ass, thinks Daryl, she had a bullet hole in her head. Daryl knows there was foul play, but can he prove it? And who would want to kill Anna and her mother anyway? It suddenly dawns on him. Maybe Anna was killed for her head right. Head rights go to next of kin. Maybe someone in her family is trying to cash in on that oil money. But this theory doesn't seem to pan out. First of all, Anna's cousin winds up dead, so that means no head right for him. Then, Anna's sister dies. Her house blows up in a freak accident and kills her instantly. Her husband succumbs to his injuries days later. No head right for either of them. Later, Daryl learns that the freak accident was no accident at all. Police discovered a bomb had been planted under the house. The evidence is piling up for Daryl. This is serial murder. Plain and simple. What he can't figure out is who might be behind it. It's beginning to drive him a little crazy. He goes up to Anna's sister's house on day and just stands there staring at the rubble. But all he can see is the image of Anna's lifeless body in his mind. And that's the first time he hears it. He's crying as a thunderstorm approaches. He barely notices as the sound of it passes over him. He feels a sensation like something soft brushing past his face, and he looks up. He hears the rain all around him, only there's no rain. He listens as the thunderstorm passes overhead. Then it's all quiet again. Daryl is stunned. He takes it as a sign. Anna's spirit is restless. She's calling him to do something so that she can be at peace. Daryl marches up to the sheriff's office. He volunteers to help with the investigation. Says he can help make phone calls, dig through the files. Whatever they need. But the sheriff tells Daryl that his grief will only get in the way. Go home and let us do our job. The sheriff stares him right in the eye as he says, I don't want you getting yourself hurt. It comes off as a threat. Daryl reluctantly leaves. But he's paying close attention now. He's paying attention when the sheriff's office arrests a man in connection to the deaths. He's paying attention when the man is released. No charges. Daryl asks around. Nobody really knows much about this man. He's not Osage. There are rumors he's affiliated with some local gangs, but nothing concrete. Daryl's paying attention to the papers too. An Osage man, unrelated to Anna, is found shot dead in his car. Another found poisoned on a train. Daryl's not the only one paying attention now. He's been going around asking questions. Other tribal members notice. They think, what if he's right? They begin to fear what Daryl suspected all along. Someone is targeting the Osage for their head rights. Nobody is safe. Then, as if to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, the son of an Osage chief dies. His name was George Bigheart, and he was poisoned. Doctors call it accidental poisoning. Whatever that means. Bigheart dies in a crowded ward in an Oklahoma City hospital. But luckily, not before making a call. He was frantic on the phone, telling his attorney that he had damning evidence linking someone to the murders on the reservation. The specifics of their conversation are unknown. But whatever Bigheart said, the attorney came away spooked. He rang the sheriff's office immediately. Hospital staff recall him speaking angrily into the phone. The attorney informed the sheriff's office that he was currently in possession of certain documents provided to him by Bigheart. They were related to the murders. The attorney intended to raise a big stink over it. He got off the phone, and hopped on a train bound for the reservation. He carried a briefcase with him. He was going to meet with the sheriff in person. Unfortunately, the attorney never made it. His body was found tossed off the train, his skull bashed in. The briefcase was missing. By this point, Daryl's at his wit's end. He knows whoever killed Anna is still out there, and they're going to keep killing unless somebody does something. Well, somebody tries. It seems the mysterious deaths attract some attention. A group of well-dressed white men arrive on the reservation. They claim to work for a little government outfit called the Bureau of Investigation, later to become the FBI. Right away, it's clear that there's tension between the sheriff's office and the Bureau boys. There's never any public statement made about this, of course. But rumors spread. The sheriff's office is stonewalling the investigation, people say. Someone was found destroying evidence. Documents. There's another rumor too. The non-Osage man that the sheriff's office originally arrested. The one who was never charged. People say he made a confession while in custody. In his confession, he implicated a man named Bill Hale. According to this man, Hale offered him money to kill Anna and her family. This revelation stuns Daryl. It stuns everyone, actually. Bill Hale is no obscure figure. He's a white man who's lived on the reservation for decades. Whereas the Osage tribe became wealthy overnight through their oil reserves, Hale earned his fortune slowly over time through the cattle trade. He's known to be shrewd, stubborn, and tough. People say he's got every local politician in his back pocket. Tribal law enforcement too. He's been accused of crimes before but never faced any jail time. If Hale was indeed involved in Anna's death, it would explain why the sheriff's office is stonewalling the Bureau boys. It might explain what George Bigheart knew too. And why he was poisoned. It would also explain the sheriff's odd warning to Daryl. I don't want you getting yourself hurt. It's not perfect, but at least now Daryl's got a theory. Hale is attempting to increase his fortune by going after people's head rights. He's hiring men to do his killing for him. Maybe he's even got people on the inside too, family members that he splits the oil money with. The sheriff's office knows something about this. But are they really in on the murders? Or are their hands simply tied by Bill Hale's power and influence? It doesn't really matter. Daryl's been looking for a fight, for a way to make himself feel like he's bringing Anna's killer to justice. It's decided. Bill Hale is behind the murders, that's all there is to it. Law enforcement is either protecting the cattleman, or they're afraid to go after him. Either way, Daryl has no choice. He's got to take the law into his own hands. Daryl imagines Hale ordering Anna's murder. He thinks of the sign he received from Anna that day at Anna's sister's house. These things cloud his mind. It's late in the day when he's driving home from work. The sun is setting when he enters his house to grab his gun. The reservation is dark as he marches towards Bill Hale's ranch. He's all alone. In the distance, a storm is coming. Hiking up a small hill that overlooks Hale's ranch, Daryl can make out 4 men who appear to be guarding the entrance. They're all armed. But Daryl doesn't care. He isn't thinking anymore. From where he's standing, he can see the main house on the ranch. Bill Hale's probably in there right now. He has his wife and children around him. They're all alive, and Anna's dead. Daryl makes his way down the hill. Like a possessed man, he marches towards his own death. The men guarding the entrance don't notice him at first. He manages to get pretty close before they do. One of the men shouts a warning. Tells Daryl he's approaching private property. The man draws his weapon. Shouts another warning. Daryl is almost at the gate now. He lifts his gun. Fires off 2 shots. Hits one man square in the chest, another in the arm. They both drop to the ground. The 2 men left standing draw their weapons and fire at Daryl. But he rushes behind a large barn. The sound of approaching rain is momentarily drowned out by the hail of gunfire. Daryl is cornered here, and he knows it. The moment that he steps out from around the barn, the men will unload their pistols. But he's not giving up. The plan was to reach the main house. Daryl's not going to stop till he gets there. Daryl's going to make Bill Hale pay. He readies himself to face the two men. He thinks, this is it. That's when the storm comes in. Its roar spreads over the ranch. It sounds like rain. But there's not a drop in sight. Daryl feels the familiar sensation of something brushing past his face. On the other side of the barn, the men are shouting. They fire off a few rounds. But at what? The storm sound is almost deafening now. There's more shouting, but the gunshots have stopped. Daryl peeks out. The men are racing towards the main house. The air is filled with the hissing sound of a heavy rain. Daryl's eyes are drawn to the first two men he shot. They're lying on the ground. Daryl goes over and kneels beside them. The one he shot in the chest is obviously dead. But the one he shot in the arm, what happened to him? His face is swollen and purple, like he took a severe beating. He's not breathing. In the distance, the shouts of the men have become screams of agony. Daryl is frightened. What the hell is going on here? Somehow, in the midst of his fear, the image of Anna flashes in his mind. He looks at the two men he killed. The feeling of guilt overwhelms him. His fingers go numb, and he drops his gun. He scrambles to his feet and hurries away from the ranch. As he races home, he continues to hear the roar of a storm in the distance. And just under that, he can just make out the men's agonized screams. The next day, when Daryl wakes up, there's one thought on his mind. What the hell happened last night? He's not sure how to explain it. It's the same thing he experienced at Anna's sister's house, but more intense. It felt angry. Was it Anna's spirit? Or something else? Whatever it was, it saved Daryl's life. If it hadn't shown up when it did, Daryl would have stepped out from behind that barn and Hale's men would have filled him full of bullets. As he's thinking this, he remembers. I left my gun at the ranch last night. His heart sinks. The sheriff's office will find his gun. Or maybe the bureau boys will, it doesn't matter. They'll trace it back to Daryl. Then they'll haul him off to prison. For a brief moment, Daryl considers skipping town. But instead he sits down and waits to be arrested. Maybe it's the guilt from killing those two men. Maybe it's the fact that he failed Anna. He was supposed to bring her justice. Whatever the reason, he sits there and waits for the authorities. While he waits, he picks up a book and begins to read. It's a book on Osage history. It's as he's reading it that he remembers a weird legend. A story about how the Osage bought their land from the Cherokee. And how the Cherokee warned them about a spirit that resided on the land. He remembers the description of it. A roaring like a river. Is this what he heard? According to the stories, the spirit went away, never to return. Did it come back last night for some reason? And if so, why? A squad car rolls up to Daryl's house right about then. It's the sheriff. He's alone. He calls Daryl over and says, "We heard there was a gunfight out on Bill Hale's property last night." Daryl is silent. He sees his gun sitting in the sheriff's passenger seat. 4 men are dead, sheriff says, 1 man shot through the chest, 3 bludgeoned to death. Daryl thinks about the man with the swollen face. Were the other 2 men also found this way? That's 4 murders total. The sheriff should be arresting him by now. But instead he grabs Daryl's gun and hands it to him. Unfortunately, no evidence was found linking anyone to the crime. Daryl doesn't move. The sheriff forces the gun into Daryl's hand. "Be careful out there," he say, "whoever killed those men hasn't been caught. I don't need anybody else getting hurt." Before he leaves, he says one last thing. "I'm going to make things right." Then the sheriff pulls out of the driveway and drives away. Not long afterwards, Bill Hale is arrested. The Bureau boys were able to put a case together with the sheriff's help. The reservation breathes a collective sigh of relief. The murders has come to an end. Later, Daryl learns that Hale won't be charged for Anna's murder. There's too much missing evidence for that. But the Bureau was able to link Hale to the murder of Anna's cousin. He'll face life in prison for it. It's not exactly justice for Anna, but Daryl accepts it. A year later, he's visiting Anna's grave. It's the first time he's seen her stone. He realizes that all this time, he hasn't actually been looking to find peace for Anna's spirit. He never accepted her death. He didn't know how to let her go. So he wasn't able to find peace within himself. Seeing her grave makes it real for the first time. Daryl breaks down in tears. In the distance, a storm approaches. It rumbles over the country. It rolls over the cemetery. It passes over Daryl. As he cries, he feels the raindrops falling from the sky. They land on his hands. They cover him completely. When the storm passes, he's all out of tears. That's a hell of a story, I tell Frank. I can't think of anything else to say. Frank says his grandpa used to sit him down every spring and tell that story. Always in the spring, he said, because that's when Anna died. Later in his life, Frank wondered if his grandpa made the whole thing up. He read everything he could on Osage history. In his readings, he came upon something. They call it the Osage Reign of Terror. A string of murders linked to the Osage head rights. Most of the information Frank found matches the story his grandpa told him. Some things never turned up though. He could never find anything about the Cherokees believing in a spirit that lived on the Osage reservation. Or of the meeting between the Cherokee elders and the Osage. But he grew up hearing stories about the ghost storm from people in town. His grandpa used to tell him that was the same spirit he encountered, it was just weaker now. I ask Frank if he believes that. Frank shrugs. If you heard my grandpa tell it, you'd believe it too. After that Frank and I parted ways. But I'm going to be honest. His story hit me later that night. Hard. I was just standing in the doorway of my motel, staring out at the field across the parking lot. I had work the next day and I needed to get to bed. But I ended up daydreaming for a long time. I thought about the Osage marching through that field, starving, looking for a place to stay. I thought about the sheriff finding Anna's body out there. I thought about Frank's grandpa marching through the night to avenge his friend. It made me think. When I first saw the field, I thought it was dry and ugly. But some people spent their lives on that land. They killed and died for it. It's crazy that we'll never even know the half of it. Anyway, good night, /x/. I hope you sleep well tonight. I'm an old fag. This happened in '89 when I was just a kid. One of the last days before winter break. School lets out. It begins to snow. It never snows here, Texas. Everyone's excited. Me and a bunch of other kids usually walk home together. We take a shortcut through a field. None of us has ever seen snow in real life. We're all walking with our heads tilted back, catching snowflakes on our tongues. Laughing. Then one of us yells out, "Hey." We all look at him and he says, "Someone just grabbed me." We laugh at him. There's nobody around but us, what's he even talking about? Keep going. Still catching snowflakes on our tongues. Laughing again. But the same kid makes a panicked sound. Then he takes off running. For some reason we all take off after him. Not sure about the others, but the panicked sound he made scared me. I'm nervously running after the kid. But he's fast and way ahead of us now. We hear him yell, "Let me go." There's nobody anywhere near him. But he sounds like he's freaking out. Then I see him trip. He falls really unnaturally. Slips over to his right into a bayou that runs through the field. Holy fuck. We all run towards where he fell. He's down at the bottom. Not moving. Blood starts pooling all around his head. We all flip out. Race home and tell our parents what happened. The kid didn't make it. For years all I remembered was the sight of this kid falling into the bayou. But later I remembered how weird he was acting before. Like I said, I'm an old fag. But the way he yelled "let go of me" was the most panicked shit I've ever heard to this day. Alright, since the last one was just about my crazy partner and was long as fuck, hey race a shorter one. Don't remember how long this was into my driving career, let's say 6 months. Got a new partner, some packy dude who lived in Vegas. The only partner that wasn't a huge weirdo and was actually funny as fuck. Super chill. Driving with him was a blast. Out in Wyoming, it was cold as fuck and wasn't even winter yet. During training my training partner was some boomer named Russ. He lived in Wyoming and would tell me about how many accidents were there. I had this idea that Wyoming was some dangerous mountain of twisting roads to navigate. Leave Salt Lake City on a delivery to Philadelphia. Take I-80, which cuts straight through the entire state. When I enter the state, I'm confused. It's literally the straightest roads out of any state I've driven in. Think this'll be a piece of cake. Around 200 miles in Wyoming I get an alert on my Qualcomm, which is like this little touchscreen computer that acts as a GPS, and a messaging system between the truck and dispatch. Wind danger, seek immediate shelter. Huh? The fuck does that mean? There's no storms, the sky is clear. And then the wind hits me. Wham. Feel like someone just struck me on my passenger side. My trailer fishtails and I begin to see the tandems, the back tires of the trailer, lift off the ground. Freak the fuck out and try to counter steer while braking, but not braking too hard or I'll lose control of the truck. Manage to come to a stop, pull off on the side of the road and put my flashers on, get out to set reflectors on the road. At this point everyone is pulling over, the wind is crazy. Get out and actually get knocked on my ass by the wind, and I start rolling. Like some shit you see in Looney Tunes. Realize putting out reflectors would be useless, they'd just blow away. The wind is like ice against my skin, I mean it actually is painful, it's so cold. Make it back to my truck. Entire interstate is shut down at this point, nobody is going nowhere until this wind dies down. Get bored listening to Coast AM talk about COVID and decide to turn on the CB. This was my partner's truck, so he had a CB installed, usually left it off because it was boomers wheezing about young people. Listen to them talk a bit, hop in and start bullshitting with the older dudes, banter, laugh etc. Thick fog rolls in, and I mean fucking thick. Can't see anything, can't even see my trailer behind me in the mirrors. It's bizarre to have all of this fog with the amount of wind we have, in fact it shouldn't be possible. Some time passes and someone hops on the CB and sounds fucking pissed. Anyone off you assholes fucking with me better quite, I got a gun and I'll shoot your diabetic asses. We ask him WTF he's on about. Some punk thought it'd be funny to either knock on my truck or throw something at it. I laugh. The things these retards will do when bored. Then someone else pipes up, says it just happened. I get a little spooked, but whatever, it's just some guy having a bit of fun trying to scare people. We notice a pattern. It's going down the interstate heading west. Then the guy in front of me, some black dude by the sound of it, said someone just pounded on his door waking up his partner. I sit up in my seat wide-eyed. Turn on my brights. And what I see? What I fucking see? Nothing. Literally nothing. Stand up so I can get a look over the hood of the truck. The moment I do. Bam bam bam. Loud as absolute fuck. Trip over the CB cord and almost piss myself. Get up and about to go see who it was when I come to my senses and say fuck that. Make sure the doors are locked, set an alarm for sunrise and climb up on the top bunk to get some sleep. Sit there staring at the roof while listening to the wind howl outside. Almost sounds like someone screaming. Get no fucking sleep. Pick related, it's IAD in WY. If you've made it this far, I'd like to thank you all for sticking around. Thank you all so much for 5,000 subscribers. Videos such as these are not easy to make, especially the /x/files which take a considerable amount of time and research. If you would like to, I have set up a Patreon page. Every little bit helps the creation of bigger and better content for this channel and allows me to spend much more time creating videos for you to enjoy. Once again, a huge thank you to everyone. Have a wonderful day.